Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. In December 2010 at St. Malachy's Church in Tyrone, Northern Ireland, it all began exactly where it ended. In front of more than 300 guests, beauty queen and educator Michaela Hardy and athlete John McArevey exchanged vows. But 3 weeks later, John came back with his young wife's body, buried in her immaculate wedding dress. What caused Michaela to pass away? Who could be so cold-blooded and cunning as to murder a woman who had just recently started to enjoy her wedded life with her beloved? And will international cooperation aid in the investigation of one of the most horrific and unforgettable crimes of the past several years? In 2005, John McArevey, the captain of the Irish football team, and Michaela Hardy, the daughter of one of the nation's best football managers, met in university. The young couple fell in love at first sight and had never been apart since. Michaela gladly accepted John's proposal while on vacation in Paris. On New Year's Eve, which was also Michaela's 27th birthday, they scheduled their wedding. Following the formal wedding, the newlyweds flew out on their 3-week honeymoon. Before the most anticipated portion of their trip, 2 weeks at the 5-star Legends Hotel, situated in the fishing village of Grand Gabe on the northeast coast of Mauritius, began, they spent the first week in Dubai. Michaela thoroughly investigated local hotels before deciding on Mauritius as their idyllic honeymoon destination. They chose the Legends Hotel because it has a lot of good evaluations and is well liked by Irish travelers. They asked the hotel's receptionist if they could be assigned to one of the better rooms when they first arrived. They were told that room 1025 in the premium block was available. On January 10, 2011, after having breakfast together, John opted to play golf while Michaela sunbathed. They had lunch together once more. After lunch, Michaela usually looked forward to tea with something tasty. While she went to the room to get Kit Kat bars with her favorite dark chocolate, which she had bought from Dubai and placed in the refrigerator, she requested her husband to get tea. Although John offered to bring her the snacks, she chose to go alone because the accommodation was only 150 feet from the restaurant. While waiting for his wife to come home, John viewed videos and shot some pictures. After a while, he started to question why Michaela hadn't returned. He made the decision to find her. John knocked on the door but got no answer. He went to the receptionist after forgetting his key in the room and failing to see anything through the window. After guiding him back to the room, the corridor attendant used his key to open the door. However, the corridor attendant heard a man's cries for urgent assistance as soon as he moved a short distance away from the door. John walked into the room and found his wife in the cold water bathtub. Her lips were blue, her skin was cold to the touch, and there were noticeable bruises on her neck. John tried to assist Michaela, supposing she had planned to take a bath because of back problems, but had slid or passed out. But his attempts were unsuccessful. The dreams of a young, contented married couple came to an end when medical authorities declared Michaela dead within an hour. People kept coming and going from the newlyweds' room, and no one tried to protect the crime scene, perhaps since it was initially assumed to be an unfortunate accident. When the police entered the room and saw Michaela's condition and the chaos within, they assumed a murder had occurred, even though they had been told that a tourist had drowned. After being brought to the police station, the distressed spouse was detained for 5 hours while being questioned. Given that most murders are carried out by people who are close to the victims, this was not unusual. The harshness and inappropriateness of the police officer's remarks in John's situation were unusual. John was obviously overcome with grief by Michaela's passing. He found his wife's lifeless body in the bathtub, while only 30 minutes before he had seen her joyfully making her way to their room. But when a policeman noticed that he was crying, he may have tried to comfort him by saying, "Why are you crying? You're still young, you'll find yourself a new wife." If the hotel manager hadn't stepped in, it's unclear how long they would have held John at the station. The management reported to the police that a master key that was taken and fit all the locks had been used to open the door of room 1025. It became clear that a member of the hotel staff was responsible for the murder. Most likely, it was an accidental killing. At 2:42 p.m., a staff member, possibly a security guard with the master key, entered the room. Michaela opened her own door 2 minutes later. The maid's sudden appearance forced the thief, who might have been hiding in a tiny alcove in the toilet, to make a snap decision. Since cleaning rooms is a standard procedure in hotels, he could have just grinned at Michaela and pretended to do his job if it was part of his responsibilities. Nothing would have happened. He was aware that his presence in the room would be difficult to explain, though, if he was a security guard. He then saw no choice but to hide in the bathroom and wait for the woman to just go. However, that did not occur. Michaela chose to seize the chance and went into the restroom as investigators conjectured. She found the robber inside. The thief attacked Michaela in a panic after she fled in fear. He put Michaela in the bathtub after realizing that he had killed her, possibly in an attempt to make it seem like an accident involving the maid. Despite the shock, he may have also imagined that water would wash away any DNA evidence left on his victim. The murderer was still present when John got up from the table at 3:05 p.m. to see why his wife was taking so long. John could have apprehended the murderer at the spot if he had his keycard with him, but by the time he approached the administrator, requested that the door be unlocked, and stepped into the room, it was 3:26 p.m., and the thief, who had inadvertently become a murderer, had disappeared. The cops were under tremendous pressure to release John. It is critical to settle the case as soon as possible when a visitor is slain in a nation that depends significantly on tourism. The local police head claimed that the island had a 100% homicide clearance rate, which gave the impression that the case would be resolved quickly. Given that Michaela was one of 30 persons slain on the island in 2011, and that all cases but Michaela's were resolved by dubious confessions, one might assume he was merely praising the work of his colleagues, but any professional would be cautious. The police once again used admissions to solve every case the following year. The investigators had a perfect crime scene, which may have made up for the police's over-reliance on instinct and intuition, if that's what it is. Surveillance cameras were installed all throughout the hotel, the room was cleaned daily, the security system recorded every entry, and the hotel itself was essentially an invincible fortress with watchful security personnel everywhere. That was not at all the case, as we shall see in a moment. 2 hotel staff members were detained by the police within 2 days after the murder, and 2 of them, Avinash Tribhovan and Sandeep Munia, were charged with the crime. The other staff members obligingly became important prosecution witnesses. Dasan Narayanan, a hotel security guard, was also taken into custody a week later. On the day of the murder, Dasan was on duty. His fingerprints were discovered on a phony key that the robbers used to replace the stolen universal key in the security room, although it was impossible to determine his precise position at the time of the crime. There was nothing Dasan could do to explain how his DNA got onto the room's safe door. He gave a preemptive explanation for why his DNA might be present if it were discovered, acknowledging that he had touched Michele's cheek in his haste to assist John. Nevertheless, the police chose to concentrate their efforts on Avinash and Sandeep and merely charged Dasan with being an accomplice to the thefts, despite his contradictory testimony. In 2012, the trial started on May 22. The police's pattern of obtaining confessions served as the foundation for the prosecution's case. According to the prosecution, Michaela discovered Avinash and Sandeep stealing cash from the safe or her purse when she returned to the hotel that day. In order to save their jobs, the robbers chose to silence Michaela because hotel workers frequently provide the majority of their family's income, not just their close relatives. Their colleague Raj Thikoi also provided testimony during the trial. After being arrested at first, he was granted immunity and turned out to be the most important prosecution witness. Raj claimed that although he was close to the room and heard a woman's anguished cries, he chose not to knock on the door. Rather, he hid and watched as Sandeep and an upset, sweaty Avinash left the newlyweds' room. When he later inquired about what had transpired, they responded, "Nothing happened, just keep quiet. If you say anything, we'll involve you in this matter." Prosecutors mostly relied on the confession that one of the suspects, Avinash Tribhovan, gave, in accordance with standard police procedures, in addition to witness statements. Because of their negligent investigation, it appeared as though the police were being judged alongside Sandeep and Avinash, even though they were the ones who were implicated. The defense lawyers called attention to all of the investigators' obvious flaws, errors, and gaps. First of all, the hotel was not closed when Michaela's death was found, and neither a visitor nor a staff member was questioned. The evidence was compromised since some tests were not carried out and others weren't done until the hotel room was given back to them. Although palm and fingerprints were discovered in the room, their owners were not recognized. However, there was no DNA evidence that Sandeep and Avinash were guilty. Even the paper money, which the authorities said the robbers were interested in, was not scanned for DNA or fingerprint. The court was also informed that numerous significant artifacts were not captured at all, and that all of the photos taken at the crime scene were in black and white. The enigma surrounding the 46 security cameras that recorded the activities within and outside the hotel, however, generated the most controversy. The cops refused to give the defense lawyers the videotapes in spite of repeated requests. As it turned out, they were unable to conceal the footage, not because they wanted to. Due to their inability to control the cameras, the police officers deleted 90% of the videos. Instead of providing a truthful response when asked to explain how the apparatus operates, they merely hit the button, which also happened to be the record button, and when they believed they were playing back the recordings, they were actually erasing them. International media questioned whether the local authorities were purposefully undermining the probe due to the police's obvious incompetence. Lastly, the defendants asserted that they only confessed after the police tortured them. Sandeep, who reportedly handed the key card, stated that he was forced to make the confession under threat of a firearm. Avinash also refuted his testimony, claiming that he vomited blood after being tortured and subjected to water interrogation by the police. He was also allegedly informed that his wife would be deported and that he would have to move to Ireland to live with John McAvery, who would now require a new wife. Avinash claimed that he only signed the document that was given to him, not even reading his own confession. Even though he and Sandeep were in room 1009 where a VIP customer was scheduled to stay when the murder occurred, another witness said he was coerced into providing false testimony. Sandeep demanded that his subordinate keep the space spotless at all times. He even picked up the mop personally at one point to show how the floors should be cleaned. Telecommunications data also supported Sandeep's assertion that he was speaking on the phone with his sister in Britain at the time of the incident. Lastly, it was verified by the retained security camera film that he was in a separate area of the hotel when the murder occurred. The court case took over 8 weeks to complete, even though it was only supposed to take 2 weeks. This was mostly because the defense lawyers went beyond the bounds of decency and made the trial into a spectacle. They frequently cracked jokes and caused the board, spectators, and law students in the courtroom to erupt in laughter. The defense brought up the possibility of a sexual motive for the crime, implying that Michaela's husband was involved. They implied potential wrongdoing between John and his wife and mentioned an intimate aid they discovered in the hotel room, but it was actually a straightforward insert from Cosmopolitan, a women's magazine Michaela had bought at the airport. Then, using a purportedly verified video, they tried to demonstrate that John and Michaela had a heated argument, but the people in the video weren't Michaela and John. Rather, they were two Germans who looked like them. In order to verify that he was the man in the video, John had to reach out to him on Facebook and ask him to give a statement at a German police station. All things considered, the sensationalism surrounding Michaela's murder case caused great distress to her family. Specifically, John was ranked highly on the list of readers' choices in a survey called Who Killed Michaela that was published by a local newspaper. In addition, the police released pictures of Michaela's battered and nude body to the Mauritius newspaper, which caused her family unimaginable distress. But these 8 weeks were over, and the jury members had to decide what to do. After a guilty conviction, Michaela's family thought the accused would have the right to request a review of the case because the judge gave a clear summary of the case and highlighted the suspect's culpability. They were certain that the verdict would be just what they had expected. The court also firmly asked the jurors to make the appropriate choice from their point of view, rather than to think about how this case would affect the nation's reputation. And the jury found Avinash and Sandeep not guilty, after 2 months of trial and just 2 hours of deliberation. After the acquittal verdict, John and Michaela's families were incredibly disappointed. They endured all the agony of the process, inappropriate remarks from attorneys and police, tolerated laughter in the courtroom, and even faced aggressive behavior from the locals because they were confident that the guilty parties would be punished for the murder. They were certain of Avinash and Sandeep's guilt and believed that they were acquitted because the case received global media attention and the jurors did not want the murder case to reflect negatively on Mauritius' image. The Hart and McKervey families cannot forget that Avinash's lawyer appeared on a local radio station and essentially admitted his client's guilt, mentioning how Avinash cried and apologized to Michaela's family. The interview was supposed to be presented in court, but the lawyer managed to evade his responsibilities. John believes that Avinash told the truth when he confessed to Michaela's murder. He is why, when everyone hears about death by strangling, they image the killer suffocating the victim, ripping their neck with 2 hands. But Avinash recalled that when they were in the honeymoon suite, Michaela walked in and spotted him clutching a pocketbook. She asked what he was doing. She couldn't have known that Sandeep was in the bathroom. When the girl tried to prevent Avinash from leaving the room, standing in his path, Sandeep approached her from behind and put one hand around her neck. The truth is, the autopsy report was prepared much later, and it confirmed that everything happened exactly as Avinash claimed. If Avinash wasn't certain, how could he have created such a strangulation technique? Avinash added that when Michaela fell, she struck her head on the ground. That was further supported by a bruise discovered on the back of her skull during the post-mortem. Furthermore, in summarizing the case, the judge reminded everyone that Avinash made his confession on January 12 and signed it on the 13th in the presence of his lawyer. Avinash would have been made to sign something else on the 12th if the cops had intended to fake the confession. Furthermore, 3 other doctors evaluated the youngster on separate days, and none of them discovered any evidence of abuse. After the acquittal verdict, a new investigation was launched. The key card that the murderer and thief used to enter the room was the main piece of evidence that the police concentrated on. Even these locks' mechanism, though, is unreliable. It is impossible to pinpoint the precise moment the murderer entered Michaela's room because the 240 locks in the Legends Hotel are not synced, and each one displays its unique time on the security system's dashboard. Because the precise hour of the crime is uncertain, this puts almost every suspect's alibi into doubt. The situation was exacerbated by the discovery of yet another serious weakness in the hotel's guest security. The number of possible suspects could rise from dozens to hundreds as a result of this vulnerability. Mauritian law states that the beach is public property if the hotel owns the guest rooms, dining establishments, bars, golf courses, and other such places. Locals own the island's beaches, and traders and fishermen have always had complete access to the hotel's grounds and the beach. Young boys are used to hanging around on the hotel grounds, and local craftsmen sell their wares to visitors. To put it another way, the hotel cannot guarantee the security of its property, even with cameras, gates, and security guards, and there is no way to confirm who entered the honeymoon room. Consequently, there were no noteworthy discoveries made during the fresh inquiry into the matter. Under international pressure, the Mauritian police examined Michaela's murder many times and even sought the services of a French laboratory for retesting DNA evidence. The discovery of DNA on Michaela's clothing that matched that of one of the suspects was reported as a major breakthrough in 2014, but this finding wasn't enough to justify a new trial. John offered a sizable reward for information regarding the case in 2017, in an effort to bring it back into the public eye. A lawyer called him a few weeks after he got back home to tell him that Sandeep and Avinash would now undoubtedly be arrested. Michaela's family was relieved and thought they would finally receive justice, but the attorney did not name the new evidence that made this possible. But months and weeks went by with no one being taken into custody. The case was formally ended in 2020, but the Mauritius government agreed to revisit it in 2021 after pressure from Irish MPs. A desire to re-examine the matter does not ensure that it will be resolved, which is the problem. It is difficult to investigate any crime after 10 years, not to mention the potential that Mauritius's authorities would not be motivated to track down the murderers. Many investigators have advanced in their careers over the course of 10 years, so if something is disclosed in the case that many would rather keep hidden, heads will roll. Following the trial, the relatives of John and Michaela sued the hotel for $1.6 million. The terms of the out-of-court settlement are not made public, but the funds were donated to a charity set up in Michaela's memory. Both the Legends Hotel, which was renamed the Lux Hotel, and Room 1025, which was renovated and given the new number 1026, are still quite popular. At a memorial luncheon for Michaela in 2013, John, who is now an accountant, met a sweet girl called Kara Brennan. John proposed to Kara, who works as an accountant, in 2015. James McAravey, the couple's first child, was born last year. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. A girl went missing after spending the night at her friend's house. In the morning, the bedroom window was wide open, and all of her belongings remained in the room. Police began looking for her, but no one anticipated the dark secrets they would soon discover in the small town. Amanda Lenke was born on June 7, 1991 in Tennessee. She grew up in a large, friendly family with many brothers and sisters. Later, they relocated with their parents to Spring Hill, Florida, where Amanda attended the local middle school. She enjoyed dancing, writing poetry, and playing multiple musical instruments, and she was a very happy child during school breaks. Amanda would always visit her grandparents in the small town of White Cloud. She enjoys spending time there because she has many friends in the town. White Cloud was a quiet and peaceful community of only 1,400 people. The majority of its residents knew each other. Amanda finished 7th grade of middle school in 2004 at the age of 13 and went to White Cloud for the entire summer without supervision or concern for their safety. Amanda spent time with her friends, went for walks, and enjoyed her vacation. On June 20th, she stayed overnight at her best friend's house. They talked, had fun, and went to bed late at night. In the morning, her friend woke up and found Amanda was not in the room. The bedroom windows were wide open. She went to the kitchen and walked around the house, but Amanda was nowhere to be found. Investigators spoke with Amanda's friend, who stated that she did not hear anything that night and that Amanda never told her she was planning to leave. The friend's parents, brother and sister, were present at the time of the disappearance and did not witness anything. Police attempted to locate witnesses who lived near the house but were unsuccessful. No residents noticed anything unusual on the first day of the investigation. Amanda's relatives were outraged by the police's version, claiming she had no problems at home and was happy to spend the summer in White Cloud. They also pointed out that Amanda had left all her belongings, including clothes, in her friend's room. The investigators decided to check the girl's computer for information that could aid in the search. They discovered correspondence with a specific young man, and based on this, the police assumed Amanda fled to meet him, but there were inconsistencies. There was no mention of a possible meeting among these correspondents, and the conversation was about ordinary and everyday issues. Nonetheless, the investigators considered this sufficient to reassure themselves of their correctness. At the time, they did not reveal all of the investigation's details, but information about correspondence with a specific guy spread throughout the city, leading many locals to believe that the girl simply ran away from home. Despite Amanda's relatives' efforts, the police did not fully utilize their resources to locate her. If the case had been classified as a kidnapping, the FBI and other agencies could have been involved in the investigation. On July 5th, mushroom pickers discovered a human body in a forest near White Cloud and reported it to police. Investigators identified the body as Amanda Lenke, who was wearing the same pajamas she had worn at her friend's house. Medical experts confirmed her identity and determined she had received multiple blows from a heave. They also decided to look into the young man with whom Amanda had communicated online. The problem was that his nickname included the word killer. Police considered the possibility that the victim went to meet him and he murdered her, but this version contained numerous inconsistencies. There was no reason to believe the girl would have gone to meet someone in her pajamas in the middle of the night, and their correspondence contained no hints of a personal meeting. The investigator was unable to identify this individual, and the version of his involvement was quickly abandoned in order to generate new leads. Detectives decided to investigate all of Amanda's belongings, which resulted in a breakthrough. They discovered her personal diary, which contained extremely disturbing information. Amanda wrote shortly before her death that a certain man was harassing her, and the following pages were torn out. Investigators suspected his name had been written on them. This diary quickly became the focal point of police investigations into the man's identity. They spoke with all of Amanda's friends and inquired whether the girl had mentioned anything about this. Several of her friends admitted that she had indeed told them about it, and even named the man Cecil Wallace, who was the stepfather of Amanda's friend, and she had stayed the night for detectives, so this was a huge surprise. They had been looking for the killer all over town and beyond, and in the end, the possible suspect was in the same house as the victim. But the friend's testimony was insufficient to arrest him. Investigators had no substantial evidence against the man. No DNA samples were found on the victim's body, and court documents did not state whether she had been abused. Detectives questioned Wallace, who denied any involvement in the crimes. The police were perplexed as to how the man could have done all of this without being noticed in a small house where his wife and 3 children were sleeping. The detectives were unable to detain Wallace due to a lack of evidence or confession. However, they discovered that Wallace's sister, Candace, worked in the police department handling Amanda's case. She actively assisted her brother and his family during interrogations, literally telling him what to say and how to behave. Other detectives were already handling Amanda's case and questioned the objectivity of the investigation by the local police. However, they could not confirm that anyone other than Candace could be helping Wallace. Investigators questioned the man and his family several times but did not yield any results. They continued to look for leads, but the case stretched on for several years. 4 years after the murder in 2008, detectives turned to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for medical help. They dispatched their investigators to White Cloud, where they reviewed all of the case materials, conducted new interrogations, and looked for new leads. Ultimately, they reached the same conclusion as the local detectives: there was insufficient evidence to make an arrest. 3 more years passed, and in 2011, the police received a new lead that changed everything. A 27-year-old Texas girl who grew up in White Cloud visited a news website from her hometown. There, she discovered information about Amanda's murder and began investigating it. After learning that the victim had spent the night at the Wallace house, the woman decided to contact the police and report something disturbing. In 1998, when she was 13 years old, she stayed overnight at Wallace's house because she was friends with his second foster daughter. In the middle of the night, a man entered their room and assaulted both of them, threatening them to keep quiet. The victims were too scared to report the incident, so they never told anyone. However, when the adult victim learned about Amanda's case, she decided to contact the police. The victims were then aged between 13 and 16 years old. In October 2011, police arrested Wallace, 43. After compiling all of the evidence, he was charged with molesting both of these victims and the man who was named as a suspect in Amanda's case for the first time. Detectives had no doubts about his involvement in the murder after hearing everything the other women had to say. At the preliminary hearing, he was granted bail of $150,000, which he was able to pay. Apparently, his sister and other relatives assisted him in gathering the funds. The trial was scheduled to begin in a month. While waiting for Wallace to return to work, the locals were upset that he had been released on bail. They repeatedly protested outside the company's office, demanding that the man be fired. On November 10th, the day of the first court hearing, an unexpected development occurred. Wallace did not appear at the scheduled time, and the police immediately declared him wanted. A few hours later, they discovered his car in the woods near the city. The man was also there. All he had done was commit suicide. Detectives who had not expected such a turn of events were forced to continue their investigation. After the suspect died, they could only rely on strong evidence linking him to Amanda's death. They obtained a search warrant for his home, hoping to find any evidence of her murder. The police searched every corner, tore down some walls and removed floorboards, but could not find any significant evidence. They turned their attention to the suspect's sister, Candace. Detectives were convinced she was covering up for her brother and wanted to know if she knew he had killed Amanda. Candace was arrested in August 2012, following the collection of necessary evidence. She was charged with intentionally misleading the investigation, but this was just the beginning. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Candace had been covering up for her brother when he was dealing illegal substances. She also taught him how to not leave any evidence at crime scenes, and she demonstrated how to properly wipe his fingerprints off surfaces so that experts could not lift them. Candace also advised him to always carry a cigarette containing someone else's DNA in case he needed to plant it at the crime scene. Detectives also concluded that at least 9 people were aware of Wallace's crimes but chose to remain silent. All were family members. The police were unable to establish guilt. Candace's involvement was investigated for 2 years before she agreed to a deal with the police in 2014. She admitted to lying to the investigators, and in exchange, 2 other charges were dropped. Wallace's sister was unable to provide consulting services on a case in which she was working as a police officer. Given that she was assisting her brother during interrogations, she violated this rule and was eventually punished. Candace, however, insisted that her brother was innocent, and the court sentenced her to 30 weekends in jail. This is a dubious practice in which the convict is only required to be in the jail building 2 days per week and is free to roam the rest of the time. Such sentences are a kind of half measure, and if a person has committed a minor offense, they can face several weekends in jail. As a result, they receive a punishment that has little impact on their lives. The convicted individual can continue to work and spend time with their family. Of course, Amanda's relatives were extremely dissatisfied with the decision. They were certain that Candace had assisted her brother in avoiding punishment. However, they were unable to fully approve it, so she received such a minor punishment. Amanda's family was forced to face yet another trial in 2004. Medical experts only handed over a portion of her remains so that they could hold a funeral. The remainder was to be kept by detectives during the investigation. However, following Wallace's death, it was decided to hand over the remains to his relatives. In 2013, the girl's family had to exhume her remains in order to bury him. Her mother is still hoping that investigators will find evidence to prove Wallace's guilt. She also seeks legislative changes to alter the police approach to searching for missing children. The woman insists that investigators should not conduct an investigation based on their subjective assessments, and that the disappearance was a voluntary escape from home. There is almost no doubt that Wallace murdered Amanda, but what was his motivation, given that there is no evidence in the court documents that the victim was subjected to violence? 2 assumptions can be made. He likely assaulted her, but did not leave any biological material, so the investigation decided not to reveal this information because it was unnecessary. Detectives could also keep this information secret for the sake of the investigation, hoping that the criminal would reveal previously unknown facts. His past crimes also speak in favor of Wallace being the killer. He assaulted at least 3 victims using the same scheme. All of them stayed at his house overnight. The question remains, why did he kill Amanda? Perhaps he planned to intimidate her, like the others, but the girl threatened to tell the truth to everyone, or she tried to run away from him, and then he panicked. Something else in this case is very alarming. Detectives suggested that all of Wallace's relatives who were in the house on the night of the murder knew about this crime, and even helped the man hide it. In addition to Amanda, his wife, son, and daughter were there. This could explain how he managed to attack the victim without waking any of his relatives. In any case, even without a final verdict from the court, Wallace will no longer be able to harm anyone. The fact that he settled the score with his life before the trial once again speaks in favor of his guilt, even though he took the details of this crime to the grave. Please share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and thank you for watching. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. This was a mass killer confessing his darkest intentions, but the real horror was the cold, calculated execution of his crime, captured in real time. On June 5, 2014, Ybarra brutally entered the Seattle Pacific University lobby and took his first victim. He had planned a massacre, but that was not what happened. During one of Seattle's worst crises, a single small mistake set off a series of events that would change everything. There were a number of horrifying facts that were just waiting to be revealed. June 5, 2014, started out like any other day until, shortly before 3 p.m., a string of calls from the same location flooded the Seattle Police Department's helplines. The city would be thrown into an unimaginable crisis and chaos in a matter of minutes. A nightmare started when a man carrying a gun entered SPU. With each call, more terrifying information surfaced. The description initially appeared ambiguous and unremarkable, but the details were beginning to come together. He wasn't an aspiring pupil. His purpose for being on campus that day was darker. But why was he there, and who was he? They would soon find out more about his nefarious schemes. The The white pickup van he was driving was seen parked on the street close to the Seattle Pacific University campus in Washington. This man, whoever he was, had no intention of going away quietly. And just as police closed in, something far worse was about to happen. Paul Lee, a 22-year-old random student, was struck by the first bullet. The question was no longer who he was. The van belonged to 26-year-old Aaron Ybarra. Now the only question was, how far would he go? A massacre was in the making, and the police seemed like they might be too late to stop it. Officers moved in, sirens heightening the tension across the campus, but no one knew what they were truly walking into, or how the standoff would unfold. Even before the police arrived, the action had already taken place, captured on camera as it all played out in real time. The man, whose identity was now confirmed to be Aaron Ybarra, could be seen walking into the hallway calmly, as if he belonged there. The CCTV captured everything, every step, every glance, but no one knew what was coming next. There, sitting innocently at the desk, was 22-year-old Tristan Ruth, unaware his life was about to hang in the balance. The man leaned in close and threatened him. "Don't move, or there will be consequences." But it wasn't just Tristan in the building, unaware of the danger. Sarah Williams, 22, had just reached the bottom when Ybarra turned and shot without thinking. Sarah was shot at close range in the chest. Tristan saw his opportunity then, and he took desperate action. The gunman would not be as fortunate, though, as his next move would be the demise of his entire scheme. Aaron's statements were obviously more than just threats. He was shooting people, and he had a clear plan that was only a few seconds away from causing total mayhem. However, he then committed a critical error. A security guard caught the gunman as he stopped to reload his weapon. A 22-year-old student and security guard named John Mice came up behind the shooter. Everything suddenly changed in a split second. He wrestled the shooter to the ground, wrenched the gun out of his hands, and pepper-sprayed his eyes. Aaron, the shooter, was on the ground with his eyes burning, and Sarah, the injured girl, took the opportunity to step aside. John moved away with the weapon to keep it out of the shooter's reach, but when he returned, he'd find a surprise. Aaron had produced a knife from his pocket. Next, John would engage in a physical altercation with the pepper-sprayed Aaron to remove the weapon from his grip. He was going to have unexpected help. Suddenly, a second hero, Justin Sarah, kicked the weapon out of Aaron's reach, ensuring it would do no harm. What was seconds away from becoming a massacre was stopped in its tracks, thanks to their courage. But the tragedy was nowhere near an end, and what came next was going to expose the harsh reality that changed everything. By 3:29 p.m., paramedics and officers from the Seattle Police Department flooded the campus. Officers immediately apprehended Aaron after finding John Mice and Justin Sarah holding him down on the hall floor. One team of police officers took Aaron into custody, while the second took hold of his van. Paramedics treated several students for shock, while Paul Lee, Sarah Williams, and John Mice were all transported to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. Paul was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. Sarah was taken to surgery right away because her condition was critical. Despite Thomas's critical condition, medical personnel managed to stabilize him, and he was admitted to the hospital. After receiving treatment for the cuts he sustained during his fight with Aaron, John was allowed to go. However, this was not the end of the story. They thought the worst was over when the police showed up to remove the gun. They were unaware that the shooter was hiding something much darker than anyone could have predicted. After being brought to the homicide and assault unit of the Seattle Police Department, Aaron was informed of his Miranda rights. Detectives Dana Duffy and James Cooper then brought him in for an interview. What secrets was he concealing, and what was his true motivation? The truth was finally going to be revealed in the interrogation room, where the answers were hidden. Aaron was still recuperating from the pepper spray, so detectives Cooper and Duffy took a while to begin the interview. They started by inquiring about his private life. Janice and Ambrose Ybarra welcomed Aaron into the world in July 1988. He grew up in Seattle's Mount Lake Terrace neighborhood with his younger brother Joel and older sister Brandy. From the start, Aaron's life was described as turbulent. Ambrose, his alcoholic father, was a frequent source of conflict for the family. Aaron discussed his psychological issues, including his severe OCD, as he became more at ease during the interrogation. As the investigators spoke with this profoundly disturbed individual, They discovered that his OCD was only the beginning of his psychological problems, which started when he was 13 years old. Innocent students were suffering on the SPU campus because of a sin that only existed in Aaron's troubled mind and about which they knew nothing. When Aaron was little, his family made the decision to rearrange the furniture in his bedroom. Aaron claims that he became fixated on the status quo and that this changed him. Aaron had realized that respect could be gained by using fear. The mass murderer Eric Harris served as his initial source of inspiration. But there was another reason why he preferred using guns to cause harm. Aaron loved firearms just as much as his father and brother did, and he even spent 8 years working at a Mountlake Terrace gun range. He was a competitive shooter who was said to be extremely proficient with a firearm. Aaron was characterized as pleasant, shy, and humorous by some of the people who had met him at work. People were unaware, however, that the quiet young man was harboring demons. The theft of Aaron's firearms was the last straw. The compulsive Aaron couldn't get over it and was convinced that he detested everyone. According to Aaron's delusions, the evil side was ready to take control. Perhaps the fatal outcomes could have been avoided if he had received therapy sooner, but that was not to be. Aaron had only begun therapy as a result of pressure from those close to him to get help. After quitting therapy, he brought his unsettling mission to SPU within a month. The next thing Aaron would say to investigators would make it impossible for it to be anything other than a premeditated crime, something he and his attorney would sincerely regret in court. Aaron's plans for July 5, 2014 were well defined. He aspired to end his life, just like one of his heroes did. It was supposed to be a declaration, but the students never took Aaron seriously and were unable to comprehend the full scope of what they had to deal with that day. He claimed that he was treated disrespectfully and that to be respected was to instill fear. Paul Lee, a 19-year-old student, was standing there. He took Aaron lightly, which was a fatal error. Aaron told the two detectives that he kept his plans a secret from everyone. Nevertheless, he documented everything in his journal and hoped that if he were killed in the shooting, others would comprehend his motivations. Aaron talked to Detective Duffy one-on-one during the interview, telling her that he had realized something was wrong with him, but that his hatred eventually got the better of him. Aaron appeared to have accepted his fate and realized that his actions would have a severe impact on his life and future by the end of the interrogation. As investigators got to work on their case against Aaron Ybarra, students began to return to campus life and resume their regular activities in the wake of the tragedy. Aaron had only managed to kill one person, but his goal was much more deadly: to cause widespread devastation. However, the prosecution was aware that the defense was preparing for a tough fight as they worked tirelessly to create a strong case. The real battle was only getting started. Aaron Ybarra was put on trial for his crimes on October 10, 2016. Prosecutors weren't going to let Aaron's defense team get away with a lesser charge or sentence, even though they were already ready to use the insanity plea as their argument in the case. According to defense lawyer Ramona Brandis, Aaron experienced crippling bouts of mental illness and depression, which caused him to hear the voice of God, who urged him to go on a murderous rampage. She also questioned his upbringing and his unstable home life, claiming that he never got the support he actually required. Aaron's victims' testimonies were crucial to establishing the case as it actually was. Paul Lee was the worst hit, followed by Sarah Williams. Before she could resume her regular life, she spent days in the hospital. She made an effort to describe the pain she endured in court. The entire scene in the SPU lobby where he and John Mice had overpowered Aaron was described by Justin Sarah. Ramona, the defense lawyer, also contended that Aaron's actions were influenced by his upbringing and unstable home life because he had sought professional help for his years-long mental illness. Under the direction of Senior Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Kristen Richardson of King County, the prosecution team was ready for the insanity defense. Aaron's own words were going to be used against him by the prosecution. They provided evidence that Aaron had voluntarily stopped taking his medication and quit therapy in order to allow his dark side to take control, shattering the notion that he did not receive assistance for his mental health problems. The assertion that Aaron was getting assistance from at least one family member was supported by testimony from his mother, Janice. His journal also provided evidence to the prosecution that he had premeditatedly planned and executed the shootings. Additionally, The recorded interrogation by detectives Cooper and Duffy was made available to the jurors, demonstrating Aaron's complete awareness of his actions and the repercussions. Aaron tells detectives in the video that he was inspired and motivated by Sung-Hui Cho and Eric Harris, but he makes no mention of hearing the voices of God or Satan. Although the prosecution acknowledged that Aaron had serious mental health problems, they made it abundantly evident that Aaron planned and chose to carry out the shooting. Now that the sentence was just a few seconds away, everyone was wondering if the jury would feel the same way. Following weeks of testimony and arguments from the prosecution and defense, the jury returned a guilty verdict on November 16, 2016. Aaron was convicted of 1 count of assault, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and premeditated first-degree murder. Judge Jim Rogers sentenced Aaron Ybarra to 112 years in prison on February 17, 2017, for the shooting at Seattle Pacific University. Aaron spoke to the courtroom full of SPU employees, students, family members, and surviving victims during his sentencing. Aaron was the center of attention, but nobody was emotionally ready for what he said next. He apologized for the horrible crime he had committed. In addition, he expressed regret for killing Paul Lee, whom he hoped was still alive. Speaking to the survivor of the attack, Sarah Williams, he told her that she did not deserve the events of that day. Aaron expressed his desire to go back and change everything, but he acknowledged that it was too late. He will be housed at the King County Adult Detention Center for the duration of his sentence. John Mize was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor in 2015 for his valiant efforts to apprehend the SPU shooter. Since the 2014 shooting, Aaron Ybarra's family has stayed out of the spotlight. The public and social media spheres still contain scant if any information about his family members and their lives. Paul Lee's legacy endures in the lives of his family and friends. Soon after Paul's memorial service in June 2014, the Lee family established the Paul Lee Foundation. The goal of the foundation was to carry on Paul's work of supporting those who experienced mental health problems and depression. It was cruelly ironic. He wanted to help people with mental illnesses, but before he could complete his education, he was harmed by someone he would have preferred to assist. The foundation has made it its mission to raise money to support groups that conduct research and create solutions to assist people with mental health conditions. Many people will be discussing what caused Aaron Ybarra to become a school shooter in this case today. Seeing young lives lost so needlessly and murderers succumbing to their own mental health problems is heartbreaking. Could something have been done to prevent this tragedy, considering Aaron's family life was, to put it mildly, turbulent? Or was he destined to become a killer? Before he committed suicide, he was troubled, mistrustful of people, and desperate to be remembered. However, he chose to target the helpless students instead of exacting revenge on the innocent or facing down actual villains. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. A 24-year-old girl went missing from the store where she worked the evening shift. Police discovered traces of blood in the back room and signs of a struggle, but it was not a robbery. The unknown perpetrator had left a fully stocked cash register. A few days later, the girl's body was discovered 5 kilometers from the store. The investigation into this terrible case lasted nearly 25 years. Lisa Sievert's fate was unknown for nearly a quarter of a century. Lisa Marie Seeger was born March 24, 1968, in Holyoke, Massachusetts. She was raised in a close-knit family with 3 other children. Aside from her, they lived in a town called Agawam. The girl has always been interested in music and has learned to play a variety of instruments. She was even a part of the school music group. Lisa attended Westfield State University after graduating from high school and earned a teaching degree in 1990. As an intern, she works multiple shifts as a counselor at a children's camp, while also teaching Sunday school at her church. After that, she works as a teacher's aide at Agawam High School, where she previously studied. At 24 years old, she spent the majority of her time working with a group of special needs children. She understood her students better than any other teacher, and she was also very professional. ensuring that each of her students received the best education possible. She also worked part-time at a local card and gift shop. On Wednesday, April 15, 1992, she finished her school shift around 5:30 and went to the store, where she worked until 9 p.m. At around 5 p.m., her sister Lynn briefly joined her at work. Lisa recalled being in a good mood that evening, and nothing foretold trouble. The next morning, saleswoman Sophia Maynard arrived at the store and was scheduled to start her shift at 9 a.m. Lisa was surprised to find her car in the parking lot. It was unusual because the girl worked at school in the mornings and was not supposed to be in the store. Sophia thought Lisa might have been out for the morning shift due to the approaching Easter. They were planning to inflate balloons for sale for that holiday. Sophia walked in the store and called Lisa by name, but there was no response. When she approached the counter, she saw her things there, including her wallet and car keys. It all looked very strange, so if she decided to call the police, a squad arrived at the store and began their inspection. Everything seemed normal. A heel strike. Despite this, they were unable to locate any useful leads on the premises. It was soon discovered that Lisa had also failed to arrive at school this morning. The principal even called her mother to see if everything was fine, but she had no idea where her daughter was. Lisa's disappearance quickly spread throughout the small town, and within hours all of her friends, relatives, and acquaintances had joined the investigation. The police began by developing a robbery theory, which quickly fell apart. Nobody had touched the money in Lisa's cash register or wallet. All of the merchandise was also available. Detectives then began to reconstruct the chronology of events. That evening, they learned that Lisa's sister had left the store at around 6 p.m. After talking to employees at neighboring stores, they obtained more information at about 7:20 p.m. Lisa spoke with the owner of the carpet store next door. They discussed a pressing problem with the local parking lot, which was being occupied by bowling alley customers. The owner told her that he himself would not risk voicing his displeasure with the drivers who parked in front of there. The door was open, but the clerk never emerged. The woman thought she heard noise in the back room, but she decided to leave. As a result, the police determined Lisa's disappearance occurred around 8:20 p.m. She served her final customer, and by 9 o'clock, something had happened to her. The detectives were to figure out what had happened during those 40 minutes. The local investigators were assisted by the FBI and state police, who coordinated a massive surge. Foot squads searched the area surrounding the store from helicopters. The more distant terrain police dogs were also brought to the store in the hopes of tracking Lisa down. Unfortunately, none of this led to any results. Investigators concluded that Lisa had clearly not left the store of her own free will, so on April 17th, the head of the local police announced a reclassification of the case, which had previously been classified as a missing person case. 2 days after her disappearance, police were already looking into a kidnapping. On Sunday morning, April 19th, all local churches prayed that Lisa would be found alive and unharmed. It was Easter, but there was no holiday spirit whatsoever. At around 2 p.m., the police received a call. A man was walking his dog on the outskirts of town near Highway 75, walking along a wooden area when he noticed a woman's body and immediately contacted law enforcement. Officers arrived on the scene and identified Lisa Sievert. They found multiple wounds on her body from a sharp object. Later, medical experts determined that the girl had also been abused. Her body was about 5 kilometers from the store, which meant that the perpetrator most likely drove the girl here in a car. A farewell ceremony was held at the church where the girl taught on Sundays. It was attended by nearly 1,000 people. The residents of the small town, who were accustomed to a quiet and safe life, panicked. Many store owners eliminated single shifts, and employees walked each other to their cars. The self-defense sections became overcrowded in a matter of days. In addition, approximately 300 women applied for firearm ownership permits. The entire town feared that an unknown criminal would strike again. The police and FBI were working on the case almost all day and night. It soon became clear that they had obtained a DNA sample from the crime scene that could belong to the killer. They developed the theory that Lisa's boyfriend was involved, but he had an alibi and his DNA did not match the sample. They discovered that the girl's friends, coworkers, and relatives had all undergone DNA testing, but there were still no matches. The police also received numerous tips from local residents. Some reported seeing a suspicious car on the night of Lisa's murder, while others claimed to know the identity of the perpetrator. However, all of these leads led nowhere, and detectives sifted them from the tire tracks on the road near where the body was discovered. The police determined that they were abandoned by a van or large SUV. Detectives questioned all drivers of similar vehicles and were no closer to apprehending the perpetrator, but they did locate a witness who may have seen the same vehicle. At around 9:15 p.m., an employee from a store near Lisa's workplace drove home. Standing at a traffic light, she noticed a large SUV pull off the road and head toward the location where Lisa's body was later discovered. The woman was unable to describe the car in greater detail because it was dark outside. She only mentioned that she thought there were a man and a woman in the car. She also mentioned that when the car pulled onto the dirt road, the woman's head twitched unnaturally, as if she were asleep or unconscious. Because this information did not aid in the identification of the suspect, all leads have been exhausted. The police continued to investigate the case, but with each passing month, the prospect of solving this macabre mystery faded. It took a year and a half before Lisa's family and friends were given another chance to discover the truth. In October 1993, national television aired an episode about the caves. The popular program aired stories about unsolved cases, which drew a lot of attention. This sometimes resulted in new witnesses for the police. The case got a second wind. Lisa's case was no exception. Within an hour of the broadcast, the police had received hundreds of calls from people with information. As is often the case, the majority of these leads led nowhere, but the police pursued each one thoroughly. The detectives stated that they had identified a few valuable leads, but did not specify which ones. Unfortunately, it did not go anywhere. The chances of solving the case decreased steadily over time. Lisa's family went to great lengths to ensure that her legacy was never forgotten. Although Lisa's teaching career was cut short early on, her relatives made significant contributions to the Agawam educational system in 1995. Lisa's parents donated $11,000 to the science division of the school where she worked. These funds were used to buy equipment and support genetics classes. The parents also established a fund to assist gifted students, which distributed approximately $35,000 in awards. Lisa was murdered 10 years ago. Her mother refused to give up hope that the case would ever be solved. She went to great lengths to honor her daughter's memory. Her mother participated in all interviews and answered reporters' questions. Every year, hundreds of people gathered to light candles in Lisa's memory. Meanwhile, police had only one piece of significant evidence in their possession: a DNA sample from the alleged killer. They kept cross-referencing it with known criminal databases, hoping that the right person would show up sooner or later, but it never happened. A new method of DNA phenotyping essence is as follows. Using the information embedded in a person's DNA, experts determine the features of his appearance and construct an assumed portrait at the time. Specialists can use DNA to determine sex, approximate age, eye and hair color. The portrait created from this data is not always accurate, but the coincidence with a real person's face can be amazing. Experts presented two portraits of Lisa's alleged killer, aged 25 and 50, based on DNA evidence. When the police department posted these portraits, they received over 170 calls. These individuals reported seeing a similar man, but the majority of these leads also led nowhere. Only a year later, on September 18, 2017, police issued a high-profile announcement that the perpetrator had been apprehended. Gary Shara, 49, was the man who revealed himself. The news quickly went viral in the American media. When the police find the killer after a quarter of a century, it is extremely rare, so such stories immediately piqued the public's interest. Investigators revealed how they located Cher shortly after his arrest. It turned out that the man was considered a suspect in 1993, a year after Lisa was murdered. Remember the federal television program that prompted the police to receive hundreds of calls with potential leads? A lawyer from Seattle was among those who called in. He informed detectives that his client may have information about Lisa's murder. She was a woman in the process of divorcing her husband. They lived in the town of Long Meadow, which was near Agawam. According to the woman, her husband was paying more attention to Lisa Sievert's case. If this murder were on television, he would rush into the room and stare blankly at the screen, completely unresponsive to those around him. As you may have guessed, this man was Gary Shara. He was 24 years old at the time. He was in a very troubled marriage with a 1-year-old son. He and his wife were constantly fighting and had begun divorce proceedings shortly after their child's birth. According to the police statement, they developed a theory that Gary was involved in 1993 but found no evidence to back it up. On the contrary, using his ex-wife as a source of information raised concerns. The truth is that she suffered from a variety of mental disorders and had a long history of alcohol abuse. Furthermore, during their divorce, Gary obtained custody of their son through the courts, but his wife secretly relocated the child to another state. Another important point to note is that this was not the first time former or current wives had called the police, alleging that their husbands were involved in Lisa's murder. Surprisingly, there were many such calls, so the detectives assumed Gary's case was just one of them. However, they questioned him, and the man denied his involvement and refused to provide a DNA sample. Because no one could legally force him to provide a sample, the police were left with few options. Later, detectives compiled a list of all the men interviewed in the case who refused to provide a DNA sample. Gary was among them, and the police called him in for questioning several more times. During the third interview in 2008, it was apparent that Gary was trying not to touch anything, not even the table. He was offered a bottle of water, but he refused. He looked as if he had only one thing on his mind: how the cops wouldn't get his DNA sample. By 2017, detectives had a list of 11 suspects on their hands, including Gary. All of them had been interviewed at various stages of the investigation and refused to voluntarily submit to DNA testing. In fact, there were many more suspects on that list, but through DNA phenotyping, investigators were able to weed out unsuitable candidates. They did not match some of the characteristics that experts determined from the DNA sample of Lisa's killer. In August 2017, detectives gathered all available information and went to court. They asked for an order compelling all the list members to provide DNA samples, and the court agreed. On September 13th of that same year, police went to Gary's apartment to notify him of this obligation, but the man was not home. The door was opened by his neighbor with whom they shared an apartment. The detectives left him their business card and asked him to give the information to Gary urgently. The very next day, something unexpected happened. Gary's current girlfriend came to the police station and reported that he had left 3 letters in her apartment. The researcher was surprised to find an apology to the secret family, as well as a detailed confession of Lisa's murder on 2 sheets. Gary wrote that he had violent and uncontrollable desires since childhood, and that evening he was obsessed with the idea of kidnapping and abuse. Gary, as he stated in a letter, allowed himself to do something horrible while driving past Lisa. The man stated that he did not intend to kill Lisa, but events allegedly spiraled out of his control. Gary stated that he wanted to surrender to the police hundreds of times but was unable to do so due to cowardice. He admitted to having suffered from self-loathing for many years. At the end of the letter, he stated his intention to commit suicide. Police immediately began looking for Gary, and his car was soon discovered in. Another suicide note was found on the windshield of a car in Stafford Springs Hospital parking lot. The man had ingested some powerful drugs, but he immediately got into his car and drove to the nearest hospital, where he was pumped out. When the doctors finished helping Gary, the police arrested him and took him to the station. At the same time, a judge issued a search warrant for both his and his girlfriend's apartments. The police discovered several objects containing his DNA. No one was surprised by the results of the analysis. It matched the killer's sample exactly, as well as several other potentially significant leads. Gary's wife, who had reported suspicions about him back in 1993, died in 2014. However, investigators discovered documents drafted by her lawyer in which the woman revealed numerous gruesome details. One day, Gary told her in plain language that he could not engage in intimacy with her unless he had a knife in his hand. The day after Lisa's murder, the woman called her sister and told her that Gary had come home late at night, was extremely disturbed, and his body was covered with scratches. He also gave his wife a music box and said that he had bought it at the very store where Lisa worked, except according to Gary himself, it was an older woman with gray hair who sold it to him. The problem is that no such employee has ever been there. It is not clear why all these details were not reported to the police in 1993, and it is impossible to find out now. While in custody, Gary suddenly proclaimed his innocence and refused to confess to what he had done. In all likelihood, he was driven by simple fear, but with that kind of evidence, there was no chance of getting away with it. The only thing he was able to achieve was a postponement of his sentence. The trial was not to begin until 2 years later, but Gary, who had been in a cell the whole time, suddenly decided to confess. On September 21, 2019, he appeared before a judge and pleaded guilty to the murder of Lisa Sievert. This charge qualified as first-degree murder, and in Massachusetts, a defendant on such a sentence faces life in prison without parole. Lisa's family was present in the courtroom. Her mother, who had waited 25 years to learn the truth, spoke. She thanked everyone involved in the investigation, as well as the ordinary concerned people who had been there for her family throughout. As a result, the killer went on to live the rest of his life. Despite taking a quarter of a century, one of the state's longest-running criminal cases was finally closed behind bars. The harsh reality in such a situation is anything but endless ignorance. Take care and thank you for watching. A freshman at a prestigious university vanished without a trace after a sporting event, leaving her car and keys in the parking lot. The police did not investigate the case, believing that the young woman had simply fled, but her parents and friends were aware that something terrible had occurred. The mystery remained unsolved for 12 years, and it wasn't until the end that the truth was revealed. Shannon Melinda was born on October 20th, 1974, in Miami, USA, and her parents welcomed a second daughter, Monique, 5 years later. From a young age, the girls were taught that their first priority should be to obtain a good education. This approach had a significant impact on Shannon. She excelled academically from the start of her school career while also making time for various clubs and sections, where she outperformed her peers in every way. Shannon made it clear in high school that she wanted to pursue a career in politics or law. She led the school debate club and, in her final year, even gave speeches in the United States. Congress and the General Assembly of the United Nations are part of special training programs. Following these events, she decided she wanted to work for the Supreme Court. To achieve this goal, she required a solid legal education. Shannon submitted applications to several of the country's top universities. Given her perfect grades and extracurricular accomplishments, all universities and colleges were eager to accept her, but she chose Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. In addition to being one of the top 20 universities in the country, Emory offered her a $15,000 annual grant for the first 4 years of study, which covered the majority of her tuition. She moved to Atlanta after graduation to pursue a degree in political science. The university made a strong impression on her. She quickly adjusted and made many friends. Shannon was able to find a part-time job despite receiving the grant. A few kilometers from her dorm was a softball field that needed employees, and her responsibilities included keeping track of the game's score. Shannon was forced to quit her job on March 26, 1994, due to an error made by her supervisor. That morning, another employee was supposed to keep score, but Shannon was accidentally added to the roster and agreed to work the game. Shannon arrived at the stadium around 8:40, and her shift ended 4 hours later. Usually after work, the young woman would stop at a nearby gas station to get a soda. That day, she also left, but no one saw her again. The stadium management had expected her to return after halftime to turn in her scorecard, but she never did. Her friend and roommate, Athena, was the first to sound the alarm. Shannon's absence from her dorm in the evening initially alarmed her. She had no other place to sleep and was unlikely to stay with anyone after not waiting for her roommate. The next morning, Athena decided to call Shannon's parents and see if they had heard from her in the previous 24 hours. Shannon's parents were at work at the time, so Monique, her younger sister, answered the phone. Monique informed Athena that she hadn't spoken with Shannon in a few days and promised to ask their parents when they returned home. Athena became increasingly concerned and told 2 mutual friends about Shannon's disappearance. They decided to look for her on their own. They got into their car and drove around campus. They eventually made it to Shannon's stadium, where they were met with a disturbing discovery. As they approached the stadium, they noticed a gas station nearby and were surprised to see Shannon's car. Her parents gave her a black Nissan 280SX as a gift. When they arrived at the gas station, they found the car empty, with the keys in the ignition and the doors unlocked. Shannon would never leave her car in such a state, which added to their anxiety. Her friends called the police because they suspected something terrible had happened. Unfortunately, the officers who arrived did not take the situation seriously. They took a quick look at the car and determined there was no evidence of a possible crime. Because there was no blood or signs of a struggle, the officers told the friends not to worry. They did not even collect fingerprints from the steering wheel or doors. Furthermore, they asked Athena to drive the car to the university parking lot, which she did. The officers spoke with the gas station attendants, who confirmed seeing Shannon around noon the previous day, but saw nothing suspicious. Shannon had most likely fled at the age of 19, according to the official police version. The case was not treated seriously. Shannon's parents decided to travel to Atlanta right away to join the search for their daughter. When they discovered that the police were unwilling to investigate, they did everything they could to change the situation, and their efforts were successful. Shannon was accepted into a non-profit organization by former President Jimmy Carter as a result of her connections after speaking in Congress. Shannon's parents had brought her disappearance to his attention. Carter and Senator Bob Graham secured FBI involvement in the case. Shannon's parents flew to Atlanta and started looking for their daughter. With the assistance of other students, they printed and distributed thousands of flyers about Shannon's disappearance. Later, her father rented a billboard and announced a $10,000 reward for any information leading to Shannon's location. The young female detectives identified several suspects among Shannon's acquaintances, but were quickly convinced of their innocence. 3 days after Shannon vanished, something interesting occurred. An unidentified man called the police hotline number listed on the flyers to report Shannon's appearance. He stated that the reporters made a mistake when reporting on the young woman's disappearance. Shannon was said to be wearing green shorts on the day she went missing, but they were actually blue. Furthermore, the caller stated that he had Shannon and would keep her as long as he wanted. Despite this distressing call, law enforcement continued to believe Shannon had simply fled somewhere. This assumption persisted for several days until April 6th, when an unidentified man made a second call. This time, he called the university's counseling center to inform them that Shannon was at his residence and was fine. He promised to call later and demand her return. Finally, he stated that he would leave Shannon's ring for the police near where he was calling to confirm his statements. This time, the FBI quickly traced the call and discovered that it originated from a payphone near a Burger King restaurant in suburban Atlanta. When detectives arrived at the location, they discovered the ring in a cloth baggie wrapped in duct tape. Shannon's parents confirmed that the ring belonged to her. This news brought them relief because it gave them hope of seeing their daughter alive again. Since then, they had been waiting for the perpetrator to call back and make his demands. This event prompted law enforcement to reclassify the disappearance case as a kidnapping. The police department appointed a new lead detective, who immediately pointed out his predecessor's lack of professionalism. He said that almost all of their actions were flawed. They did not take Shannon's fingerprints and instead asked a stranger to drive her car to another location. They also did little or nothing to investigate the case, believing that the young woman had simply run away and would return shortly. With this in mind, the investigators decided to rework every possible lead from scratch. The first thing they looked for was the softball field where Shannon was last seen the day she vanished. The fact that the young woman had been missing for several weeks added to the confusion. In addition, a championship game was held on the field that day, bringing the total number of visitors and participants to over 100. The detectives attempted to question as many people as possible, urging them to recall any suspicious incidents during the game. To their surprise, many people shared the same story. The only oddity in that game was the referee's behavior. According to the players and stadium staff, he was extremely dismissive of his job and was constantly distracted, even during important events. Instead of doing his job, he kept trying to talk to Shannon and ask her out. The referee's name was Calvin Hinton, but he preferred the nickname Butch. The 33-year-old man worked as a mechanic for Delta Airlines and refereed matches as a hobby. He had a wife, taught Sunday school at the church, and appeared harmless. The detectives dug deeper and discovered that Butch had left the softball field around the same time as Shannon. After speaking with his coworkers, they discovered another strange detail the day before the game. He had asked the other umpires to fill in for him because he was supposed to have a date. They were all aware that Butch was married, but he explained that his wife was out of town for a few days. When all of his coworkers said no, he called his boss and requested to leave the game early, explaining that his brother's wife was in the hospital and they had no one to leave the children with. Butch returned to the stadium 2 hours after leaving, still wearing his officiating uniform. He went into the locker room, changed, and then left. 3 hours later, he returned to the stadium and was spotted by a colleague and asked what he was doing there. Butch explained that he had forgotten to deliver his paycheck to the accounting department, but he didn't have it with him. Furthermore, Butch asked his colleague if he had seen where his car was parked for a man who had just arrived at the stadium. That question seemed strange. Investigators questioned Butch, who denied any involvement in Shannon's disappearance. He said that after leaving the stadium, he went straight home. As proof, he showed detectives several outgoing phone calls made within 40 minutes of leaving the stadium. He agreed to a polygraph interview, but failed. Almost all of his answers were found to be false, but they were insufficient to warrant his arrest. It was, however, enough to obtain a search warrant for his home, which was conveniently located near the Burger King where the police discovered Shannon's ring. Detectives discovered 2 additional intriguing facts. His neighbors claimed he lit a fire in the early morning hours following Shannon's disappearance. Later, Butch called his father and requested a handsaw, claiming that a tree had fallen on his car. Detectives went to his house with their service dogs but found no evidence of Shannon's presence there. However, they noticed 3 areas with overgrown soil. When they dug them up, they discovered something extremely creepy. There were dozens of women's clothing and shoes beneath the ground, as well as a sleeping bag and softball field scorecards. Experts examined the excavated clothing, showed pictures to Shannon's parents, and determined that none of it belonged to the young woman. Butch admitted he had no idea where these items on his property came from. He assumed they were left by the previous owners of the house. In the end, the police were in a difficult situation. A number of facts pointed to Butch's involvement in Shannon's disappearance, but there was no direct evidence against him. They hoped that a more thorough examination of Shannon's vehicle would yield results, but they were out of luck. Because the police did not collect fingerprints or DNA samples on the first day of the investigation, the experts were unable to locate them. However, they came to an interesting conclusion: someone had thoroughly wiped down the car, erasing any potential traces. In an attempt to gather hard evidence against Butch, one of the detectives discovered an intriguing fact. He examined the bag containing Shannon's ring and discovered that such items are not made for retail sale. He contacted the manufacturer and discovered that Delta Airlines was the only buyer of such bags in Georgia. According to the company, mechanics use the bags to store small airplane parts. As we recall, Butch was a mechanic for that company. The detectives thoroughly examined everything and discovered another tiny clue. In Butch's car, they discovered a piece of the same duct tape used to wrap the pouch. On the tape itself, the experts discovered microscopic particles of the same metal. After analyzing its composition, they determined that this compound is only used in the aviation industry. Despite this, the case remained frozen for several months. The police and Shannon's parents were certain that Butch was responsible for the young woman's disappearance, but no one could prove it. All evidence was circumstantial. When the airline learned of the suspicions against him, they fired him immediately. Previously, he had managed to mockingly boast to his colleagues that he was a suspect in a kidnapping. After reviewing his background, investigators discovered Butch had a lengthy criminal history. They were unaware of this at the start of the investigation because advanced criminal databases did not exist in the 1990s. It turned out that he had committed his first crime while a minor. He worked part-time and one day went to his boss's house, where only his wife was present. Butch attempted to tie her up but failed. The woman persuaded him to leave by promising not to tell anyone, but she then called the police. Butch was arrested but, due to his age, was only ordered to receive involuntary psychiatric treatment, despite admitting to intending to abuse the woman. When he was in his 20s and married, he was arrested again for kidnapping a 14-year-old girl. He called his younger brother's ex-girlfriend and scheduled a meeting, assuring her that his brother would accompany him. However, he arrived alone and, claiming to have a gift from his brother, tied her hands and led her to his home, locking her in the basement. Butch's wife discovered the victim and contacted the police. The girl told investigators that Butch had molested her, but he only received a 4-year sentence. She also revealed disturbing information: Butch had threatened her with the same fate as 2 previous victims. Butch was released early, less than 2 years later, and remarried, his new wife unaware of his criminal history. The police suspected he had other victims whose remains were never discovered. Investigators were never able to charge Butch in Shannon's case, so they continued to search for evidence without success. Butch was released from prison in December 2003 after serving an 8.5-year sentence. During that time, police were unable to connect him to Shannon's kidnapping, but they struck lucky. Butch frequently hinted to his fellow inmates about his involvement in the case. Detectives interviewed about 10 inmates, and one, Adonis Cornwell, remembered Butch's late-night confession. Butch claimed that Shannon was killed by the demons inside him, not by him, and that her body would never be found because it had been scattered to the wind. This testimony, combined with previous circumstantial evidence, enabled investigators to take the case to trial. Butch was arrested in August 2004 and charged with kidnapping and murder. According to the investigation, Butch saw Shannon at a gas station and lured her into his car using false pretenses. He threatened her and drove to his home. He then returned to the stadium, parked Shannon's car at the gas station, left the keys in the ignition, wiped away the prints, and left. When he returned home, he most likely abused, killed, and disposed of Shannon's remains. Many questioned whether the court would convict Butch without a body. At the time, there had never been a case in Georgia where a person was convicted without a body. Investigators worked hard to get the most out of the circumstantial evidence. They even brought in inmates to testify on Butch's confessions. Despite this, Butch maintained his innocence. Following the trial, the jury was unable to decide. Butch was found guilty of murder after 3 days of deliberation. Consequently, the court sentenced him to life in prison. He was 43 years old at the time, and in theory he should have spent the rest of his life in prison. But there was one unsettling detail: the perpetrator was eligible for parole every 7 years under the statutes in effect at the time of the murder. Butch attempted to challenge the court's decision but was unsuccessful, and 2 years later, in 2006, something very unexpected happened. He decided to confess to the murder. His story was almost identical to the prosecution's. He saw Shannon in the parking lot and suggested she go to Burger King for a meal. Shannon agreed, so they drove there in his car. After lunch, they returned to the field, but Butch missed the right turn, came to a halt, and complained that his leg was cramping. He asked Shannon to drive and sat in the back seat. He pulled out a prepared knife and threatened to make the young woman drive to his house. He tied her up and told her he would not hurt her. Butch stated that all he wanted to do was sell her car and then let her go. She remained calm and did not attempt to scream or fight back. Butch returned to the stadium and drove Shannon's car to the gas station, leaving the keys inside. He did this in the hopes that someone would steal it, which would throw the cops off guard after thoroughly wiping the steering wheel and other areas where he might have left fingerprints. Butch returned home, abused the young woman, and then left for the movie theater with his nephews and their parents. Apparently, this family outing was planned as an alibi. When he returned home, he continued to abuse Shannon while repeatedly promising to let her go as soon as he sold her car. He then allegedly began to realize the gravity of his actions and attempted to figure out what to do next. He went to bed, awoke a few hours later, and began to panic. He then went down to Shannon's house, wrapped a tie around her neck, and strangled her. According to Butch, she was sleeping at the time, and everything happened quickly. Next, he spent hours debating what to do with the body. By morning, he had decided to burn it, so he started a large fire and added fuel before putting the body in. He changed his clothes and attended the church service. When he returned home, the fire had allegedly consumed all remains. The man claimed that the unbearable weight of guilt forced him to confess what he had done, but it was difficult to believe. First, he made 2 taunting phone calls to the police and the university, claiming Shannon was still alive after having already disposed of her body. Second, he intended to kidnap another woman, his wife's closest friend. That day, as soon as his wife left town, he called her and invited her over, claiming that he and his wife wanted to meet her, but the friend declined, saving her life. Knowing this, can we speak of Butch's remorse and guilt? In addition, he claimed that the fire reduced the body to ashes in a matter of hours, which appears impossible. The man stated that when he returned home from church, there was no trace of Shannon. He allegedly waited for the ashes to cool before gathering and dumping them on the railroad tracks. Most likely, he lied and needed to bury the remains, including the bones, somewhere. But why would he do this? Butch's only option was to realize he might never be released and play the remorse game. However, if he had pointed out where the body was buried, his sentence could have been altered, denying him the opportunity to petition for release. Despite the fact that experts discovered traces of fuel, He continued to insist that the fire in his house was caused by a broken vacuum. He is currently in prison, and his next petition for parole can be filed in 2025, when he will be 64 years old. Shannon's parents are still fighting to prevent his release. The only question that remains for investigators to this day is whose belongings were buried in Butch's backyard. Was he involved in the deaths of other young women? Possibly in the dozens? Please leave your thoughts on this story in the comments, and thank you for watching. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. When 9-year-old Charlotte Senna abruptly vanished in the middle of the crowded park in Greenfield, New York, a fun and laid-back day in the park turned into every parent's worst nightmare. Charlotte appeared to disappear into thin air, but dozens of people immediately began looking for her. In a matter of seconds, the nation's attention was drawn to the Charlotte disappearance case, a terrifying story of a kidnapping, endless searches, and an amazing turn of events that left everyone in shock when the kidnapper gave a crucial clue to solving the case. Possibly more than one, this thriller is full of unexpected twists and events that unfold before our eyes. Charlotte Senna, a 9-year-old fourth grader, lives in Greenfield, Saratoga County with her two sisters ages 4 and 10 and her parents, David and Trish. Her mother is a food inspector for the Stewart Shops chain, and her father, David, is a pipeline mechanic. Charlotte's parents are a typical working family, and they never would have thought that their daughter would be the object of a repeat criminal who wants to use her to help him out financially. Evidently, though, nobody is immune to the nightmare that has become reality. Charlotte was having a picnic with her family and friends on Saturday, September 30th, 2023, at Morrow Lake State Park, which is only a 15-minute drive from their house. The 6,250-acre park is named for Morrow Lake, and is located 70 kilometers north of Albany, New York. It is a well-liked recreational destination with boating and fishing opportunities, a sandy beach, 158 picnic areas, walking trails, and amazing dense forested areas. Its easy access to other resort towns draws tourists from all over the state. David and Tricia Senna, Charlotte's parents, made the decision to unwind with a sizable gathering here. Charlotte and her friends went cycling around lunchtime. She was about to head back to the camping area after a few rounds when she promised her friends that she would complete one more lap alone before joining the others. The time was around 6:15 p.m. back then. Her parents, however, became aware of her absence 10 minutes later. Other park visitors quickly joined them as they started looking for her and addressing her by name. To assist in finding the child, people got up from their tables and left their food. The area where she vanished became chaotic. They eventually located her daughter's bicycle at 6:45 p.m. That was the beginning of every parent's worst nightmare. The parents had already called the police at 6:47 p.m. They were appalled that they had already lost 30 minutes and were positive that Charlotte had been kidnapped. How were the girl's parents made aware of her abduction? They got a clue from her bicycle. Charlotte wasn't the type to just up and start walking instead of riding her bike. She could ride with the breeze, so why would she get off? If the bike had malfunctioned, things would have been different, but it was in perfect operating order. Besides, it was standing on its kickstand, not lying on the path. In other words, something, or probably someone, managed to attract the girl's attention, stop her, and then kidnap her. Police officers reached the park by 7 p.m. There were definitely severe worries about Charlotte's safety, because the bicycle was located, but she was nowhere to be found. But the police could not rule out the possibility that the child had just lost their way. As a result, both directions were pursued. Information regarding the missing child was quickly disseminated by the media. Numerous individuals looked for her, but as night fell, the situation deteriorated. Over 100 people had already begun searching the park by Sunday, and another 300 joined them the next day. They looked through a number of phones near the park. Luckily, visitors had to register and pay an entrance fee, which allowed the police to interview everyone who had come to the park for recreation. But this took time, and when the officers searched diligently and failed to locate the girl nearby, they began to suspect that she had been kidnapped. Furthermore, Charlotte's scent trail was lost nearly at the same location as her bicycle. If it was a kidnapping, the kidnapper probably had a car, took the girl inside, and drove off. As a result, the stakes were much higher. The likelihood of finding the kid alive drastically decreased just 3 hours after the kidnapping. This is due to the fact that most of the time a criminal views the victim as an object to satiate their personal desires rather than as a child. The victim becomes a witness, evidence of their crime that must be removed. Once they have accomplished their objective, of course, this discussion is about a situation in which the abductor is an unrelated individual who targets the victim, not about a parent kidnapping a child because of a custody dispute. The police put an officer at Charlotte's family's home immediately after she vanished. As David and Tricia Senna, Charlotte's parents, were still looking for their daughter in the park on October 1st, very early in the morning, even before dawn, a car pulled up close to their home. At 4:20 a.m., the policeman observed an unidentified man placing something in the family's mailbox. The man hurriedly got into the car and drove away as the officer started to approach him. Despite noting the car's model, the officer was unable to apprehend him. The police were shocked to discover a ransom note in the mailbox. For Charlotte, the man demanded $50,000. He allegedly made her write the note by force. For failing to stop the stranger, the officer was criticized. It was a chance to save the child and apprehend the kidnapper. Although he witnessed the man leaving the letter, the officer was unable to determine what the man had left in the mailbox. Many people send the parents cards, flowers, and letters of support after learning about a child's disappearance. But this note proved to be very important in saving Charlotte's life. The kidnapper must have arrived so early because he thought no one would be home and no one would notice him. However, he left a crucial hint. The case made an unexpected breakthrough at 2:30 p.m. on Monday, October 2. A fingerprint was discovered on the note by forensic specialists. They found a match after running the fingerprint through the database. Craig Ross, who was previously charged with driving under the influence in Saratoga Springs in 1999, owned it. Craig was among the people in the park when Charlotte was kidnapped, and his phone ping matched theirs. Additionally, a car registered to Craig was tracked by the police back to his mother's house in Bolton Spa, New York. Craig lived behind his mother's house in a tiny motorhome. DNA frequently plays a big part in cases like this, but in this instance, the letter contained an old fingerprint that was found to match a prior drunk driving case. Given the fingerprint, DNA would undoubtedly be present on the note, but fingerprint comparison is 1,000 times quicker. 2:30 p.m. was when the match was found. The FBI and police had already encircled Craig's home by 6:30 p.m. When a child's life was on the line, they didn't need a warrant. Craig's neighbors said they never expected to see something like that, and that the suspect's capture was more akin to a crime thriller. Approximately 6 p.m., about 200 meters from their home on Monday, Charlene and her 11-year-old daughter Bella spotted a number of police officers. Around 6 p.m., a neighbor of Craig's reported that she saw 2 cars stop on her lawn and went outside to eject the rude drivers. Then, out of the cars came police officers fully armed and wearing bulletproof vests. At least 15 police and apprehension team vehicles gathered close to Craig's residence. Armed with weapons and flash grenades, at least 30 officers in full uniform poured out of them and went into action right away. The neighbors at the time found it incomprehensible that their neighbor was detaining the missing girl against her will. But when they saw a convoy of police and FBI cars close to their homes, an ambulance and a helicopter hovering overhead, all of their doubts were dispelled. When the suspect was apprehended, the neighbors were afraid he would rush them and kidnap them and their kids. However, the officers took prompt action and prevented the situation from getting out of hand. Craig was taken into custody after 20 members of the apprehension team barged into the house. During the arrest, he resisted and was slightly hurt. The man was only wearing his underwear when they caught him. It was difficult to find the girl. She was also covered and concealed in the man's bedroom in a tiny closet. Charlotte realized right away that the officers were there to save her. When she realized that everything would be all right and that she would soon be seeing her parents and sisters, it was an extremely emotional moment. The girl was wearing a sweatshirt that was too big on her, which is interesting. One can only be thankful that Craig's motivation was financial, given that he was wearing his underwear and the girl was wearing a sweatshirt. Even though he had complete control over her, he could have done anything he wanted with the girl, and the rescue effort would not have ended as happily. The authorities notified Charlotte's parents that their daughter had been saved, was alive and unharmed at 6:32 p.m. According to Craig's neighbor, she saw Charlotte's face and exclaimed, "It's her!" "She's there," as she watched Charlotte being loaded into the ambulance. The woman acknowledged that until her mother showed up and reassured her daughter that Charlotte was safe, she longed to embrace and hold her. Over the course of these few days, the girl became like family to everyone who had been worried about her. Everyone, including the police officers, prayed for her and hoped she would return home safely. As everyone saw the successful operation to free kidnapped Charlotte, they all exhaled, celebrated, gave each other pats on the back, and congratulated one another. The police officers' discovery of the potential kidnapper was a startling moment. Their two objectives when they stormed the house were to capture the kidnapper and save Charlotte's life. In this instance, things turned out better than anyone could have imagined. The criminal has been apprehended and the girl is safe and unharmed. But what if money hadn't been his motivation? It would have been too late by the time they recognized him. The mere thought of it is terrifying. Charlotte was taken to the hospital right away, and following a medical examination, her family was allowed to return home. Charlotte is in excellent health, aside from the evident shock following the kidnapping. She will still have to respond to inquiries regarding the kidnapping and her experiences during her captivity, so it's not quite over for her. To prevent Charlotte from experiencing more trauma, investigators will enlist experts who are trained in communicating with young victims. A significant development in the 3-day search for the girl was revealed to the media at a press conference on October 2. Craig, 47, faced first-degree kidnapping charges on October 3, the very next day. He had previously dealt with the police. First of all, he was arrested for driving while intoxicated in 1,999. His fingerprints were taken at that time and added to the police database, allowing the authorities to connect him to Charlotte's kidnapping. After he was arrested for second-degree stalking in 2016, his girlfriend sought a restraining order against him a year later, after he tried to strangle her by grabbing her by the neck. The police were looking into his involvement in violence against his 12-year-old relative just 1 month prior to Charlotte's abduction, but the case was closed. According to reports, the man, who has multiple sclerosis, moved into a trailer on his mother's property. Due to missed payments, his condition became so bad that he was unable to stay in his previous home in Porter's Corners, New York. Craig has an 11-year-old daughter and 2 grown children. He is characterized by his neighbors as a reclusive individual. They did, however, occasionally catch him working in his home's yard and interacting with his daughter, who is 11 years old and lives with him most days of the week. In reference to the man's older children, Craig's son said, "He doesn't want to get involved with his father, doesn't want to hear anything about him, and finds his behavior disgusting." Craig is currently detained without the possibility of bail on a first-degree kidnapping charge. He will be represented in court by a free attorney who has been given to him. Although the motive for the kidnapping is not officially stated, based on the ransom note, it is reasonable to assume that money was a major factor, even though the police are not very forthcoming with information. Craig's former girlfriend, Amanda Priest, had a lot to say. According to her, Craig hated his job and was constantly looking for people he could trust to help him. Amanda is certain that money was the driving force, but it's interesting to note that Craig appeared to have targeted Charlotte in particular, rather than just any child. The problem stems from an incident in which Patrick Senna, Charlotte's grandfather, sued Greenfield after a sledding accident in 1998. The $2 million settlement he received was well known among Saratoga's citizens. Given this knowledge, Craig may have been monitoring the family to learn more about their residence, regular locations, and other details. This is exactly why Craig kidnapped the man's granddaughter and demanded a ransom, Amanda claims, in an attempt to obtain funds to help him out financially. Amanda also mentioned that Craig had covered his trailer's windows with tarps not long ago. She is certain that everything was carefully planned as a result. He kept an eye on the family, observed them, was aware of Charlotte's routine, probably followed them from their house to the park, and waited for a chance to see the girl by herself. Investigators are looking into whether the suspect in Charlotte Senna's case is connected to any other crimes, such as the kidnapping and killing of 18-year-old Jennifer Hammond and 19-year-old Christina White. As is customary, investigators are looking into his involvement in any significant incidents in the area, even though there is currently no evidence connecting him to these cases, since their disappearances in 2003 and 2005 respectively, from Milton, the same town where Craig spent decades. The cases of Jennifer and Christina, whom investigators believe to be connected, have remained unsolved. On November 2, 2003, Jennifer went missing according to her boss. No one saw her after co-workers dropped her off at the Creek and Pines trailer park where she was supposed to sell magazines. Later, all of the girl's possessions were discovered in an Albany hotel room where she was lodging with co-workers. After Christina's family last saw her in the evening on June 30, 2005, 2 years later her disappearance came to light. 5 kilometers from her home, witnesses reported to investigators that they saw her strolling down a road. In March 2006, hunters discovered Christina's remains, which were essentially just a skeleton, 16 kilometers from her last known location in the D-Town forest in Greenfield. According to the autopsy, Christina's chest and abdomen were fatally struck by the murderer. In October 2009, Jennifer's remains were discovered a few kilometers away. Although the cause of her death is unknown, investigators concluded that considering the location of their kidnapping and the location of their bodies, the girls were most likely murdered by the same individual. According to criminal profiler John Kelly, who was familiar with the area and probably liked red-hamed girls, Craig Ross presumably abducted Charlotte, but we know that the best predictor of present or future behavior is past behavior. Therefore, it's always important to find out if a person has committed abductions in the past. There may be a connection because Craig's path from the park to his house apparently goes through wooded areas connected to these 2 unsolved murders. He was keeping an eye on the family and may have believed he could kidnap them again because he had done it successfully in the past. However, he could demand ransom and simultaneously improve his financial situation rather than committing murder. In any event, the inquiry is still ongoing to determine whether he is connected to any other crimes. He has been questioned by the police in the interim to determine whether he was keeping an eye on Charlotte and whether his motivations extended beyond his need for money. The Senna family thanked everyone who put in so much effort to bring their daughter home. Naturally, they expressed their relief at Charlotte's return home and recognize how lucky they are that things turned out this way. They are aware that not all kidnapped children make it back home safely. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The phone rang early on April 27, 2006, in a comfortable home in a small Michigan town. The homeowner's previous life was instantly shattered by the sound she heard when she answered the phone, but the second phone call she would have to take 5 weeks later was nothing like that conversation. Whitney Sarek, an attractive and outgoing 18-year-old student, was crossing campus to attend a lecture on Wednesday, April 26, 2006. Whitney attended Taylor University in Upland, Indiana, as a freshman. Both Whitney and her older sister were now students at the same university where her parents had previously attended. Whitney actually wanted to attend a different university, but her parents assured her that they would pay 2/3 of her tuition if she attended a Christian university. They wouldn't even cover the cost of her education if she chose to go to a non-religious school. Whitney's decision was clear-cut, given the high expense of higher education. Whitney became anxious as she made her way across campus, negotiating crowds of other students, as she realized how quickly the school year was coming to an end. She was thrilled to spend the summer vacation with her parents in the small Michigan town of Gaylord, but she was also saddened by the thought of bidding farewell to her new friends, whom she wouldn't see again until the fall. During her first year of college, Whitney had made a lot of new friends. She soon found that the older students were just as amiable as the freshmen and had gone through many of the difficulties of college life, so she also had a few older friends. They were willing to help if she asked for advice. Because she thought she might learn something useful, Whitney seized the chance to engage with older students whenever she had it during her studies. Whitney saw a poster asking for student volunteers to help decorate the banquet hall for a celebration honoring the new university president just that morning as she was making her way to her lecture. As she got closer, Whitney found that the majority of the volunteers who had signed up were older than she was. When she heard this, she also wrote her name down. The student had a typical rest of the day. After studying and hanging out with friends, she went back to her dorm room in the evening and fell asleep quietly. Naturally, She had no idea that the events that would alter her life would occur just 24 hours later, when she laid her head on the pillow that night. Whitney got up early the following morning, showered, brushed her teeth, and took her time choosing her outfit. Whitney wasn't conceited, but she wanted to look respectable because she knew she would be interacting with university employees and senior citizens all day. As she got closer to the parking lot meeting place, she noticed some students standing close to a university van. Despite not knowing them, she greeted them with confidence, introduced herself, and since she was the first person they had been waiting for, they all boarded the van. With ease, the car began traveling north on Highway 69 in the direction of Fort Wayne. It was the banquet hall, where the event was scheduled to take place, and it was only an hour away. Whitney immediately started talking to Laura Van Ryn, a 22-year-old who was seated beside her. Another student questioned whether Whitney and Laura were related, despite the fact that they were strangers. In addition to having similar appearances, the two stunning blondes who were tall and slender learned that they had been raised in small Michigan towns. Whitney's hometown of Caledonia, 2 hours south of Gaylord, was where Laura had traveled to study. In addition, they were both younger daughters of devoutly religious parents and were involved in sports, playing football, basketball, volleyball, and running. The students went into the banquet hall as soon as the van came to a stop. It was their responsibility to get ready for the celebration. As they set the tableware, arranged the chairs, and arranged the tables over the course of the following few hours, Laura and Whitney remained together and spoke amicably. The volunteers ultimately determined that their work was finished at around 7 p.m. They took their seats on the van again, and the van drove back south. Laura and Whitney chatted for a few more minutes on the drive, but they soon felt the weariness from their work, just like the other children. They fell silent as they looked thoughtfully out the window at the passing landscape. When the van was within 2 miles of the campus, about 30 minutes later, a bright beam of light filled the van's interior. It quickly grew stronger, bouncing off the faces of those inside, and in a matter of seconds the whole interior of the van was blazing. After a horrified scream, there was total quiet. In a matter of minutes, distressed drivers on Highway 69 called the 911 hotline to report that something horrible had happened. Rescue personnel were shocked by what they saw, even though they had prepared for the worst when they got to the scene. Bodies, glass fragments, and wreckage littered the area. The headlights of a fully loaded truck driven by Robert Spencer were the source of the sudden light that filled the van's interior. While traveling north on the highway, the truck driver had dozed off behind the wheel. The truck didn't stop when it swerved off the road and onto the grassy median strip. After veering back onto the road, it struck the southbound van that was transporting the students. The truck literally tore off the van's back end when it hit it, sending it spinning uncontrollably. The pupils were thrown out and dispersed in all directions, since half of the vehicle was gone. Sadly, 5 of the 9 people in the van could not be saved, but when the rescue crews arrived, they discovered Robert still alive inside his truck. A few hours later, on April 27, Whitney's mother in Gaylord got a call early in the morning. Her husband wasn't at home because he was helping the church rebuild houses following Hurricane Katrina's devastating effects. The coroner, who was on the other end of the line, told the woman that her daughter had died in a terrible accident. The Van Ryn family also had to take a late phone call at the same time, 3 hours south of Gaylord in Caledonia, but they were informed that Laura had survived the same accident and was in critical condition. Early in the morning, the girl's boyfriend, Aaron, and her parents arrived at the hospital. In the hallway, Laura's classmates were already anticipating their arrival. The girl was in a coma, swollen, bandaged, and wearing a neck brace as she lay in a hospital bed. Laura's leg, elbow, collarbone, and ribs were all broken, the family was told, but the brain trauma was the most serious injury. The patient had been stabilized, but it was unclear if she would ever awaken from her coma. Even if she did, she would probably not be able to live independently because of the severe damage to her brain. Laura's family made the decision to move her to a Grand Rapids rehabilitation facility that specializes in brain injuries because they knew that her recovery would be a long one at best. Additionally, Whitney's sister and mother showed up at the hospital. Even though they were only a few feet from her body, the coroner reassured them that they didn't need to identify her and even discouraged them from going inside the mortuary. They were also given Whitney's handbag, which was filthy, stuffed with broken items, and smelled horribly of gasoline. When the handbag was discovered close to Whitney's body, the women knew that her body would be in an even more appalling state. They didn't want to remember her that way, so they couldn't bring themselves to look at the body. They merely returned their daughter's body to Gaylord, their hometown. Whitney's 19th birthday fell on her farewell, so her family chose to play a collection of videos from her past birthdays. More than 1,400 people, or roughly half of the town's total population, came to bid her farewell. She was laid to rest in a closed casket the following day. Meanwhile, Laura's family members, who alternated between sitting in the girl's hospital room, received a startling update. Brain scans suggested Laura would emerge from her coma, but it was not clear when. For the next few weeks, Laura stayed in a coma, but her injuries healed over time, and there were all indications that she would get better. After 30 days following the incident, Laura finally regained consciousness on Tuesday, May 16. At first glance, her brain appeared to be operating normally. It was a miracle, and her family was incredulous. The girl was getting better pretty quickly, and she soon had the ability to sit up and move her hands and legs. Laura's loved ones discovered a lot of new information about her at the same time. Laura's 3-year boyfriend, Aaron, whom she intended to wed after graduating from college, was astounded to see that her eyes had changed from being greenish to a much deeper shade of blue. Additionally, her sister discovered that Laura had a belly button piercing when she inadvertently lifted her shirt. Additionally, the girl appeared to have shifted her teeth to one side. All of this, however, seemed trivial. What mattered most was that Laura was still alive and making progress toward recovery. Or did she? Before long, she did something that caused her family, doctors, and others to question whether her brain was working correctly. A week after emerging from the coma, Laura sat on a hospital bed with her family and medical staff on Monday, May 22. She was given a pencil and paper by the doctor, who asked her to write her name. Laura took the pencil, nodded as though she understood the assignment, and began writing the letters slowly. But her scrawls didn't make sense when she was done, and the doctor saw what she had written. He requested that the girl repeat the action. She began writing even more intently, but the name was still wrong. Laura was mistakenly identifying herself as someone else, and the doctor had to acknowledge that her brain injury might be more severe than he initially believed. But that was not the problem, as everyone would soon discover. There was something far more serious going on. Her father was deeply hurt when Laura told him that they were fake parents. This was the next warning sign. Although it was impossible to accuse them of being bad parents, he took it to mean that she thought their relationship with her was phony. However, his wife also started to believe that if Laura wasn't who she claimed to be, after Laura's face stopped appearing swollen, friends who saw her also came to the conclusion that she was not herself. Compared to their parents, her sister Lisa found it a little easier to accept the truth. Lisa once paused as she was escorting the girl back to the room following therapy, knelt beside Laura, and expressed her pride in the girl's development. She then requested that she respond to a single question: what was her name? The girl said, Whitney. However, they clarified to her that people who have experienced brain trauma occasionally mispronounce their own names. Because of this, when Lisa inquired about the names of her parents, she replied, Sarah Newland and Laura and Whitney had only known each other for a short while, so Laura was unable to provide an accurate response. Despite her understanding, Lisa didn't want to frighten the poor girl who was seated in front of her. She summoned the courage to compliment her, carried her back to the room with composure, and told their mother and father everything. A horrible reality hit the entire family when their father discovered that his daughter had been identified only by appearance. The parents of the girl they had been caring for all this time deserved to know that Laura had been dead for 5 weeks. Rescue services began working at the scene on that terrible day of April 26, following the accident, attempting to ascertain who else they could assist and who was beyond saving. On the side of the road, they discovered a girl who was critically hurt and barely surviving. Medical personnel hurried to her, loaded her into an ambulance, put her on a stretcher with a nearby handbag, and drove her to the hospital. While treating the injured girl, the doctors looked at the identification in the handbag and recognized her as Laura Van Ryn. As the bandages were gradually taken off, it was clear that Laura's appearance had changed dramatically as a result of the accident. But her appearance didn't matter to her family. Her survival was a great relief to them. However, When they gave Laura paper and a pencil on Monday, May 22, and asked her to write her name, she wrote Whitney instead of Laura. It turned out that there had been a terrible error, but no one had been aware of it until that point. The medics thought Whitney's handbag was hers when they discovered her by the side of the road. They came to the conclusion that it was the same person after comparing the girl's photo with the one on the identification. Surprisingly, Whitney's purse had landed beside Laura at the same moment. The case of mistaken identity was formally confirmed 1 week after Whitney wrote her name on the paper. And once more, in the middle of the night, the Sarok family's house rang with an unsettling phone call. In order to spare Whitney's mother from hearing the news alone, the coroner asked her to bring a companion. She invited Carly, her eldest daughter, to accompany her. After that, the coroner started talking about the possibility that Whitney was still alive. They were terrified of what they would see on the way to the hospital. If Laura's parents were unable to identify that it wasn't her, how should the patient appear? However, their worries were unjustified. They knew it was Whitney as soon as they walked into the hospital room. For Laura's loved ones, the miracle for the Sarok family became a nightmare. They were afraid that Whitney's parents would be upset with them for preventing them from seeing their daughter for so long, in addition to learning that their daughter had been dead for 5 weeks. Nonetheless, the Sarok spouses realized that they shared some of the blame. Laura's family believed what they were told, and they didn't recognize Whitney's body. All the clues were compared to pieces of a puzzle, but how could they be certain that a puzzle needed to be put together? Since one family had already gone through what the other had not, they were able to empathize with one another. Laura's body was exhumed and shipped to Caledonia a few days later. Despite their brief acquaintance, Laura and Whitney's shared tragedy united the two families for all time. They respected each other's sentiments, emotions, and personal space by not talking about what had happened for 2 years. However, they later made the decision to write a book in which they detailed every incident and offered their own interpretation of it. It was discovered that the driver responsible for the incident, Robert Spencer, had been operating a vehicle for 9 hours beyond the permitted limit. He was given a 4-year prison sentence after acknowledging his guilt. He was incarcerated for 2 years in total. He recovered from the accident at the same hospital where Whitney was thought to be Laura. By asking Laura's parents what they would say and how they felt about the person responsible for the accident, reporters attempted to incite them against Robert. But Laura's family overcame it. Neither of the two families brought legal action against him, and they were kind and understanding. To make sure that such an error would not occur again, the state of Indiana modified the process for identifying incident victims. Whitney acknowledges that she only remembers the banquet preparations and the pizza they had as a post-work snack, not the actual incident. The time she spent with Laura's family is completely forgotten. She recalled waking up with her mother close by. She gradually recovered physically and finished her studies. She married in the same church where her funeral was held 4 years later. Her boyfriend, Matt Wheeler, was her pick, and he helped her get better. They are parents to 2 kids. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The frequency with which people are buried alive in movies makes you unconsciously believe that this never occurs in real life. Regretfully, incidents like this do happen, and the best evidence of this is a story that happened in Huddersfield, UK 10 years ago. Marcin and Michalina fell in love right away. When their feelings waned, however, Michalina insisted that it was time for her to move abroad and begin a new life. Marcin, though, would sooner kill her than let it happen. Not all people separate like well-mannered adults do. Some people think they can literally bury all of their problems in the ground. Here, 19-year-old Marcin Kaspak and 21-year-old Michalina Lewandowski first crossed paths in their home country of Poland in 2005. A year later, Marcin asked Michalina to marry him, and the two of them relocated to the UK to begin a new life together. But things soured between them in 2008 after Michalina found out she was expecting a child. They canceled their engagement, but they still lived together in Marcin's parents' home. Michalina wore her engagement ring even after the engagement ended because she still loved Marcin and hoped they could resolve their differences. that was not meant to be, unfortunately. By 2011, Marcin's lack of interest in making amends with Michalina was clear. In an effort to stay away from her, he trained 5 times a week at the gym and spent nearly all of his free time there. Unexpectedly, however, Marcin asked Michalina to accompany him and his friend, 18-year-old Patrick Boris, on a shopping trip on Saturday, May 28, 2011. Michalina was taken aback because Marcin didn't often show an interest in hanging out with her. Still, she was relieved and hoped that things would get better now. The girl quickly went to the restroom to apply makeup. Jakub, their 3-year-old son, was fortunately with his grandmother, Marcin's mother, on that particular day, and was not present when the events transpired. Upon exiting the restroom, Michalina noticed Patrick and Marcin gazing at her with a horrifying smile on their lips. Taking Michalina's hand, Marcin said, "I want to show you something." Then he took a 300-000-volt stun gun out of his pocket, put it to her neck, and pressed the trigger. The agony swept through Michalina's body as she collapsed to the ground. Bodybuilder Marcin, who weighed 101 kg, saw her convulse from the electric shock while kneeling on her chest and holding her down on the ground. Momentarily regaining consciousness, Michalina asked Marcin if he meant to murder her, to which he replied that she should not be afraid, as he would simply take her somewhere. Patrick was then told to get some packing tape. The men taped Michalina's mouth shut, gagged her, and then tied her wrists and ankles. They shocked her with electricity once more before abandoning her, frightened and bound. Even though she initially believed it to be a mean joke, she was now certain of their true motivations. She was immobile and worried about fainting, not knowing if she would ever regain consciousness. Michalina was hauled into the kitchen and crammed into a cardboard box by Marcin and Patrick a few hours later. One day, they brought up a plastic bag. Marcin started to tape the box shut, but she thought they were going to put it over her head to suffocate her. The girl struggled to scream as she lost what little peace she still had. Then Marcin got on his knees, chuckled, and declared, "I've been hating you for 4 years. Your son will never be seen again." His uncanny composure on his face was more terrifying than the hateful words he spoke in this scene. The cardboard box was sealed. Then the men picked it up from both sides, carried it to Patrick's car, and put it in the trunk. The girl knew they had gone far before Patrick and Marcin took the box away. Michalina felt her back being scratched by the stones as the men pulled her along the ground. The fact that Marcin and Patrick had taken her to a wooded area close to Huddersfield was hidden from her inside the box. After digging a shallow grave beforehand, they buried the box containing Michalina inside. Michalina was lying in the box, still in excruciating pain and terrified, when she heard the men hurling dirt onto her grave. The box itself was dark and extremely small. In an attempt to keep from passing out, Michalina began breathing as shallowly as she could, because she was certain she would suffocate. In an effort to determine whether the car had moved on so she could start to flee, she strained her hearing. That Marcin would hit her with a shovel if they were still around when she tried to escape was no longer a possibility. Even though Michalina was unable to hear a car leaving, she eventually made the decision to take action, whether or not they were in the area. She made an effort to maintain her composure despite the thousands of ideas racing through her mind. She would later admit that she kept going because she was thinking about her little boy, Jakub. She would never see him again if she passed away, and he would be left motherless. She could not let that occur. Looking down at her restrained wrists, Michalina realized she had her diamond engagement ring, which she could use to break free. Michalina was able to sever the tape that bound her mouth, hands, and feet with the ring's sharp edges. She started scratching at the box's cardboard after that. After some time, she managed to make a tiny hole in the cardboard, which she discovered was a little damp, perhaps from the wet dirt that had been piled on top of it. Through the gap, Michalina stuck her fingers out and ripped the box apart. She only felt dirt, though. The same dirt that had been thrown on her grave by her boyfriend. She was still unaware at the time that, in addition to the meter-deep layer of dirt they had buried her beneath, they had also positioned a 40-kilogram log on top to make sure she couldn't get out. As more and more dirt soaked into the box, it covered her clothes, hair, and face. Michalina cried out for assistance, but no one was there to hear her. Her body shook with pain, and she grew weary, but she knew that continuing on was essential if she hoped to see her son again. "Don't give up," she said to herself again. Simply, don't give up. Michalina persisted in pushing, tearing, and pounding at the cardboard box until she managed to reach out her whole hand and raise her head above the floor. She breathed in the fresh air with anticipation. She could see the sky above her head, the trees, and the leaves, even though it was dark. Even though Michalina was completely covered in dirt and had lost all her strength, she no longer had any doubts about her ability to get away. Finally, she was able to pull herself up and claw her way out from under the ground with one last effort. After being in the box for an hour, Michalina miraculously emerged from her grave. In addition to surviving, she saved herself by using the diamond engagement ring that her would-be murderer had given her. Running toward the road from the woods, Michalina signaled a passing vehicle. That the driver didn't run away in fear when he saw a weak, dirt-covered woman come out onto the road was a great blessing for her. He listened to her and then stopped to call the police to find out what had happened. Michalina showed the police the cardboard box where she had been left to suffer her last moments in horrifying pain when they arrived at the crime scene 15 minutes later. Without a doubt, Marcin had never been more terrified in his life than he was when the police knocked on his door and told him he was being taken into custody on charges of attempted murder and kidnapping. He resisted for a long time, claiming that his intention was not to kill Michalina, but simply to frighten her. But no one took this defense seriously, so it didn't do him much good. After leaving Michalina to die, the men took PS500 from an ATM using her bank card, went home, and began playing video games, as the police quickly learned. In fact, Marcin was not planning to return for Michalina. His idea was completely different. Marcin, 25, was a dedicated bodybuilder who had become dependent on anabolic steroids, which led to his frequent outbursts. He concluded that it would be best for his son to grow up without a mother at all. After learning that Michalina had decided to leave the fight for their relationship and was going to return to Poland with Jakub, Michalina would not be able to raise his grandson as well as his own mother. With the intention of killing his ex-fiancée, he came up with one of the most horrific ways to end her life. Marcin was given a 20-year prison term after being found guilty of attempted murder and kidnapping in January 2012. Although Patrick was convicted of kidnapping, he was not found guilty of attempted murder. He received a 4.5-year sentence in a juvenile detention center. Both men were not eligible for parole until they had completed half of their sentences. Marcin won't, however, be available for purchase anytime soon. The police searched his parents' home, where he lived with Michalina and their son after he was arrested. The house contained a variety of chemicals and instructions for making explosives, according to the police. Consequently, Marcin received 8 more 4-year sentences for the explosives, while already serving his sentence for attempted murder. I prevented him from achieving his goal of killing me in the most horrific manner possible, even though he wished for my demise. I battled my way out of that grave with the last of my strength. Following the delivery of the guilty verdict, Michalina remarked, "Now it is he who is imprisoned." Even after learning that her ex-lover had received a 20-year sentence, Michalina is still terrified. Despite having moved to a different home far from Huddersfield with her son, whose address is kept secret for their safety, Michalina acknowledged following the trial that she still has nightmares about what she endured. "I was buried alive and trapped in that shallow grave, and I was afraid that my life was over and that I would pass away. In order to survive and care for my young son, I prayed to God. I had the courage to leave that box and flee when I thought of my son. I had a deep affection for Marcin Kasbach for many years, but after the terrible attack on me, my affections for him deteriorated into hatred. I still have nightmares about Marcin returning, finding me, and killing me. I'm hoping he understands how wrong what he did to me was. The difficulties I faced that day, at the hands of a man I trusted and loved, are something I hope no one else will ever have to go through." And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. This story is about a pair of lovesick maniacs from England who have dedicated their lives to murdering children. Working together, The lovers would lure them into a deserted location and subject them to hellish torments. Even after their arrest, the criminals found ways to torture the teenagers, while prominent British politicians lobbied for their release. Ian Brady and Myra Henley were born on January 2, 1938, in Glasgow, Scotland. His mother, Margaret Stewart, worked as a waitress, and his father's identity is unknown, according to her. He was a local journalist who died 3 months before her son's birth. Margaret gave 3-month-old Ian to the Sloane family, who had 4 children of their own. Ian took their last name but continued to see his mother regularly. At the age of 9, he and his family moved to the town of Pollock, where he enrolled in the local school. From an early age, Ian's acquaintances noticed his cruelty to animals and later described him as the Terrible. He dropped out of school and started working at a shipyard, but after less than a year he changed jobs and became a messenger butcher. He was put on trial again at the age of 16. His girlfriend, Grant, went to a dance with another boy, and Ian threatened her with a knife. The judge sentenced him to probation with the condition that he live with his birth mother and her new husband, so he relocated to Manchester. Patrick Brady, as you might expect, adopted his stepfather's surname and hired him as a fruit porter at the market, but the hard work did not appeal to Ian a year later. The young man was caught stealing a bag of lead seals with the intention of selling them on the black market for extra money. Due to his age, he was sentenced to 2 years in a juvenile facility. While serving his sentence, he obtained alcohol and became inebriated. As a result, he was transferred to a stricter institution. Myra Henley was born in Manchester on July 23, 1942, 4 years after Ian. Her family was not ideal. Her alcoholic father frequently beat his daughter and instilled violence in her. After her parents had another daughter, the family moved into a dilapidated house with only one room that was mostly safe. Myra was sent to live with her grandmother. Her father taught the girl self-defense in a brutal manner. He demanded that his daughter fight back against any abuser and would not tolerate weakness. He once made her beat up a neighbor's boy for scratching her cheek. Later, the maniac described this incident as her first victory. Another shock during the girl's childhood was the death of her close friend, 13-year-old Michael Higgins. He invited her to swim in the nearby abandoned reservoir, but she declined. As a result, the boy drowned, and Myra felt bad. Following that incident, the girl gradually began to explore religion. She joined the parish of the local church and became godmother to Higgins' nephew. When she was 16, the girl started working as a clerk in a small firm. Her responsibilities were straightforward: brew coffee, fetch something, and print documents. Despite this, she quickly gained the team's trust after receiving her first paycheck. Myra Spence will be out of work for a week. Then her co-workers chipped in, giving her the same amount from their pockets around the same time. The girl intended to get engaged to her boyfriend, Ronnie Sinclair, but later changed her mind. She changed jobs when she was 17, but she didn't seem to enjoy the new job as much. 6 months later, she was fired for chronic absenteeism. At the same time, Myra went to the judo section, where even the guys refused to fight her. Once she got a taste for it, she couldn't stop in time, causing serious injury to her opponents. At the same time, Myra colored her hair pink. The future maniacs met at Millward, where they both found jobs. Myra was 19 years old when Ian turned 23. According to the young woman's diary, their first conversation occurred on July 27, 1961. Myra initially sympathized with the young man despite his criminal record, but eventually lost interest. However, 6 months after they met, Ian asked her out to a movie, and the young woman agreed that the choice of a movie for a first date was as strange as possible, a documentary about the Nuremberg trials, and that the couple continued to go to the movies for the most violent films. And soon Brady instilled in Myra an enduring interest in Nazis. They frequently sat down together to read materials and books about the atrocities of the Third Reich while drinking German wine, which piqued her interest. Myra began to imitate the Aryan young woman model, dyeing her hair white and wearing dark red lipstick. Later, she dramatically changed her wardrobe to more candid short skirts, leather jackets, and high-heeled shoes. The couple continued to work together, but their attention to the team dwindled with each passing day. Calling the relationship perfect at the time was impossible. In a letter to an old friend, Myra revealed that Ian had slipped her sleeping pills. After a few months, Ian and Myra decided to rob a bank. The young woman rented a van and attempted to learn how to shoot, but failed to master the skill. Despite this, she eventually acquired a rifle and 2 revolvers. The couple eventually abandoned the idea, and they were likely safe. They were eventually given new housing through a government program because their previous one was deemed unsafe. Brady was also the first to express Myra's deepest desire to commit the perfect murder. He was inspired by Meyer Levin's book Coercion, in which 2 teenagers plotted to kill a 12-year-old boy in order to avoid the death penalty. The young woman was undeterred by this revelation and agreed to assist her lover. The plan was extremely simple. Myra and Ian planned to find the victim along the road, then take her to a remote location and kill her. Brady told Myra to drive the van down the street alone while he followed on a motorcycle. After spotting a suitable victim, the maniac was about to signal his accomplice with his headlamp, after which she was to persuade the victim to get into the car on the evening of July 12th, only 1 month after moving in. They went out to hunt. Brady chose the first victim and signaled to Myra, but she drove past him, catching up with her. He demanded explanations. The young woman revealed that the maniac's target was 7-year-old Marie Rock, who lived next door to her mother. According to Myra, they would have a very difficult time getting away with it because the police would immediately begin searching for such a young child. The couple then continued down the street, looking for another victim. At 8 p.m., Brady made his decision on Fraxmer Street, and Myra recognized the girl once more. She turned out to be Pauline Reed, her younger sister's 16-year-old friend who was on her way to the disco. Determined to act, Myra stopped and offered her a ride, and the girl got into the car, which took her to a deserted location. Myra made up a story about losing an expensive glove on the Saddleworth. Heath was popular among locals due to its abundant supply of peat, which was used as fertilizer. Pauline agreed to assist her acquaintance shortly after arriving at the location. Brady approached them. Myra informed them that the girl was her boyfriend, and he would assist them in their search. The final outcome of the situation remains unknown. The problem is that Brady and Myra tell 2 different stories, but they all end up with the same outcome. In Ian's version, Pauline is murdered. The girl was abused and killed by him and his lover, Myra. On the other hand, she claimed that she was left in the car while Pauline and Brady allegedly went to look for the glove. After a while, the maniac returned alone and reported the girl's death. He led Myra to her body, and she noticed that the girl's clothes were severely wrinkled. Myra's version does not make sense to me. What excuse would a 16-year-old girl have for going on a search with a stranger while Myra was sitting in the car? Most likely, with this story, the maniac was attempting to absolve herself of direct involvement in the murder after burying the body. Myra and Brady packed the motorcycle into the van and drove home. On the way, they saw Pauline's mother and brother looking for the girl. After nearly 6 months apart, the couple decided to act again, but this time with a 12-year-old boy. When the boy saw the victim in a store, they struck up a conversation and offered the child a ride home as an added incentive. Brady offered the boy a drink once inside the car. He specified that the alcohol be picked up at their house, but first a pair of maniacs asked the child to assist in the discovery of a fictional glove in Saddleworth, much to his dismay. The boy agreed. The situation then proceeded in the same manner as before. Hinley claimed Brady had taken the child from the car, abused and killed him. The maniac reiterated that she was not present during the entire ordeal. 7 months later, on June 16, 1964, the couple abducted 12-year-old Keith Bennett while he was on his way to his grandmother's home. He met the same fate, violence, and murder. The police, who were unaware of serial killers at the time, initially arrested the boy's stepfather but discovered no evidence against him. The next murder occurred 6 months later, on December 26, 1964. It is unclear whether they were able to maintain this cycle unintentionally, or if the pause was necessary to lull the police into a state of alertness. You'd think that if children began disappearing one after another in a small town, law enforcement would devote all of their efforts to apprehending the maniac, but on December 26th of that year, with only a few days until the New Year and Christmas, Ian and Myra decided to give their town another unpleasant gift. This time, the situation has changed dramatically. They searched for their new victim on the playground. Leslie Ann Downey, 10, was scattering shopping bags near the car. The maniacs asked the girl to assist with the collection after asking her to help them transport the bags home. The girl consented and was assaulted. As soon as she crossed the threshold, the couple began abusing the unfortunate child in her home for an extended period of time. After playing with her, the sadist killed her and returned the corpse to Saddleworth. Myra insisted that she was not present during the murder. The attentive viewer recalls that the couple lived with Myra's grandmother. Where was she at the time of all these atrocities? On the morning of the murder, the caring granddaughter sent her to a relative's house and forbade her from returning home. Despite this, the old woman attempted to return in the evening, but Myra refused to let her in. The next day, after cleaning up the girl's corpse in the house, she returned with the grandmother. The couple committed the next murder. 10 months later, breaking a strange cycle, but that wasn't the only thing that made this case unique at the time. Maureen, Myra's younger sister, David Smith, 17, was already married. The couple frequently spent time together, and the young man quickly won Brady's heart. First and foremost, he was eager to hear everything the maniac had to say, including speculations about Nazi philosophical speeches, dreams of robbing a bank, and so forth. Second, he had already been to the police station several times, just like Ian had, despite the fact that their crimes were very similar. Smith was caught breaking into someone else's home and inflicting serious battery. Perhaps Brady regarded him as a protege, a new member of the improvised gang. As time passed, the young man paid more and more visits to their home, and during lengthy conversations with Ian, talk of murder began to emerge. Myra became concerned that their relative would run to the police, but Brady insisted that he thought Smith was his own and trusted him. He even told her that he and Smith would be committing a crime together soon. Myra and Brady went to Manchester Central Station to look for a new victim, and Ian quickly made his decision. He met 17-year-old Edward Evans, who agreed to come to his house after a brief conversation. When the company arrived at the house, they drank wine, and Brady eventually sent Myra to get Smith. The action picked up quickly after he arrived. Myra's words allowed us to reconstruct the following picture. She had gone into the kitchen to feed the dogs. Smith stayed in the living room. Several minutes later, she heard screams and fighting. The girl entered the room and saw Evans and Brady struggling. After a brief fight, Ian grabbed an axe and struck the victim several times with its blade. He strangled the unconscious Evans by wrapping an electrical wire around his neck. Brady wanted to take the body to the wasteland right away, but it was too heavy. Additionally, the maniac twisted his leg during the fight. Finally, he decided to leave it at home and travel with Smith to Saddleworth. The next day, he asked him to stay so he could understand the gravity of his actions. Smith initially agreed to help Brady dispose of the body. Perhaps he was too scared to refuse. The young man may not have shared the homicidal couple's sadistic tendencies, given his history of minor law breaking. After listening, she requested that he report the horror to the police. Smith listened to her and called the cops from a nearby phone booth at 6 a.m. His story differed slightly from what Myra would later say. The police archives include an exact transcript of that call. Brady led me into the kitchen and offered me 3 small buns with a drink. I nodded and asked for the rest. Ian went into the living room while I waited in the kitchen. After a few minutes, I heard a wild scream like a woman screaming in a high-pitched voice. After hearing Myra's screams, I ran into the living room and saw a young man lying face up on the couch with his feet on the floor. Ian was standing over him, holding an axe over his head and hitting him on the left side of his head. The officer knocked down the maniac's door, and Myra opened it. He took out his identification card and quickly made his way into the house, where he caught Brady, who was writing an explanatory letter to work and asking for time off due to an injury. The officer told a made-up story about investigating gun cases and asked to see the house. Myra agreed, and he inspected all but one room. The young man described how Ian bragged about killing 3 or 4 children and even gave the approximate location. Brady allegedly met Evans in a bar, and a fight ensued, and somehow the boy came to his house. Smith had also testified against Brady at the time, and the police believed his testimony much more. There, the police found many interesting finds. Notebooks, lists of names, photographs of Brady and Myra Simpson, and explicit pictures of them. The notebooks contain lists of coded words, which the police were quickly able to decipher. It turned out that Brady kept records of burial sites, weapons, and methods of killing. As it was impossible to assert the exact location of all the victims on the basis of this information, it was rather superficial. Another book contained a list of names including all the victims of the couple, but here's the strange thing: in addition to the victims we know, the list contained the names of other children. With all this information, the investigators questioned Brady again, and his story was once again very weak. Allegedly, the list contained the names of his friends, and he had joked about killing children in his conversation with Smith. At the same time, the police managed to find the very suitcases, the contents of which shocked everyone. There were photographs of a naked girl. Also found in them were audio tapes, one of which would soon become perhaps the most damning evidence in history. It contained cries and pleas for help. The tapes contained recordings of Nazi plays, and one of the mothers recognized her daughter Leslie Ann Downey's voice. The suitcases also contained photographs of the marshland backdrop, various batons, lashes, and erotic magazines. A recording of the girl screaming and a photograph of her would have been enough to PR. On October 10th, police discovered a child whose hands were sticking out of the ground due to the body's composition. The child's identity will not be confirmed until after 150 officers were involved in the search for bodies in the swamps. Initially, they focused on the area near Route 628, but later, based on witness statements, they moved to Route 635, where they made their first discovery. On April 19, 1966, Myra and Brady were charged with the murder of Edward Evans Lessell in one of the most high-profile trials in British history. He did not deny taking them, but claimed that the girl was brought to their home by two men and then taken away to an unknown destination. The police temporarily halted their search of the swamps due to the onset of winter. During the trial, David Smith, the main witness, signed a contract with a local newspaper to give an exclusive interview if Myra and Brady were convicted. The newspaper paid him a significant sum of money for this. Shortly after his transfer to Wormwood Scrubs, Brady, who had been placed in solitary confinement, went on a hunger strike. He was unhappy with the ban on socializing with other inmates. Prison officials have decided that a child killer is going to afterlife rather quickly as a result of his dramatic weight loss. The maniac was transferred to the hospital wing, where his life took on new colors. He was allowed to watch television and do house cleaning work. At the same time, juvenile delinquents with mental disabilities were admitted to the hospital wing of the prison. In 1981, one of these teenagers said that Brady had forced him into intimate contact. Later, similar statements by the victims surfaced, repeatedly taking advantage of access to secluded corners of the prison. As a janitor, Ian led his victims there. When prison officials learned of this, he was banned from cleaning, but no further charges were filed. More interestingly, he was left in the hospital wing next to the same teenagers. It would seem like such a thing was possible, but there was nothing the chief medical officer of the prison could do about it. British law mandates the prisoners be assisted, and Brady used this skillfully. He threatened to resume his hunger strike every time he talked about being transferred back to a cell. In 1982, a harsh decision was made to transfer the maniac to another prison with stricter conditions. However, 3 years later, in 1985, Brady was declared insane. Thanks to this, another transfer awaited him at Ashworth Psychiatric Hospital. Many of you may have wondered how such a violent sadist managed not only to establish a comfortable life in prison, but also to do his dirty work with teenagers. The answer might surprise you. He was helped by the Earl of Langford. Frank Pakenham, one of the leading politicians of the time, gave favors and privileges. Brady approached him while in prison, and soon the Earl actually sided with him. Of course, there was no talk of helping to get the charges dropped, but Ian didn't count on that. Pakenham helped him stay in the hospital by appealing to Britain's Home Security himself. After that, the politician repeatedly bailed out his newly minted friend by pulling the right strings in the British upper echelons. But the main request to Brady was that he could not fulfill the maniac dream of a date with Myra. On that note, let's move back a bit to Hindley's story. Her life behind bars was much less intense, but not without interesting moments. While in prison, she managed to have a mistress, but more interestingly, she was able to get out of there for a while, not long after beginning her sentence. Henley began a torrid affair with the warden, Patricia Cairns. Together, they planned an escape but were caught by the police in the preparation stage. As a result, Cairns went from a prison employee to a prisoner for 6 years in November 1986. Keith Bennett's mother wrote her a letter begging her to tell her about her son's fate. It was filled with pain and despair, and the last lines were clear. "I am a simple woman working in the kitchens of Chrissy's hospital. It took me 5 weeks to write this letter because it is very important to me that it be accepted by you as it is a plea for help. Myra was taken to Saddleworth Heath, which was cordoned off by 200 police officers along its perimeter, and her task was to locate the bodies of children whose fate was still unknown. The detective couldn't tell if Henley was moved by this or if there were other motives, but she agreed to participate in the investigation under tight security. Since then, Myra has been out on the heath several more times, and in 1987, the caps were successful, and that's what you call the discovery of Leslie Ann Downey's body. And later Pauline reads, once Brady learned of his former lover's cooperation with the investigation, he also decided to partially confess to what he had done. True, the maniac asked to be given the means and opportunity to leave his life, which no one could legally do, having been refused. Ian still talked and also expressed his desire to help the police in their search for the remaining bodies. On July 3rd of that year, he was taken to Saddleworth, where he was never able to pinpoint Keith Bennett's burial site. Later, frustrated detectives refused to make another trip to the heath with the maniac, and he turned to reporters. In a letter, he indirectly admitted that he killed 5 other children, but police could not confirm this information. 6 months later, Brady still secured a second visit to Saddleworth, but again proved useless. Keith's body has yet to be discovered. In 2003, the police resumed their search using the most advanced technology, but it yielded no results. They only had 40-year-old photos, making finding the right place next to impossible. Myra made a long attempt to obtain an early release. She wrote appeals that secured Lord Longford's support, and by the early Nazis, almost everyone was convinced that her release was inevitable, unfortunately for her life. Otherwise, Hennel. Yes. The cause was complications from a heart condition. The rest of Brady's life was less rosy, while Myra's release was seriously considered. Ian's release from the asylum was being given the go-ahead by senior British officials. With each year in the asylum, he gradually went mad until he lost what little, if any, sanity he had left. In spite of this, he managed to live long enough until he was 79 years old. In 2017, the maniac died of cancer, and the urn with his ashes was buried at the bottom of the sea. Brady's death made a few people sad. His namesake Police Federation branch chairman Ian Hansen noted that such monsters deserve no sympathy. That was the end of the story of the child-murdering lovers, but in Britain, their names will long be remembered. Ian and Myra are a prime example of inhumanity, boundless impotence, and cynicism, as well as a total lack of morality. Just by remembering the history of the past, we are able to prevent the events of the future, so our work is not in vain. Please share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and thank you for watching.